Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Gin and Tonic Show. I'm your host, Almighty Atheismo. Joining us again, back by popular demand, is the Rationalizer. Take a bow. Klingschor, Stopspamming, and our special guest this week, Mo Ansar, who is joining us for our discussion on the history of Christianity and Islam, how they impacted one another, and how they got along or didn't at various points in history. So, if anyone wants to call in and join us, well, you don't actually call in. If anyone wants to join us on the panel to ask a question about our current topic or anything that you'd like to discuss, just send a Skype contact request to The Gin and Tonic Show. Do not call into the show. We will call you when we're ready to have guests. Also, all guests are advised that we do record this for later upload on YouTube and also stream it live over Blog TV. Make sure that when you come into the call that you mute and minimize your Blog TV if you're watching it on Blog TV. Otherwise, you'll hear and see everything twice, once on a delay, and that'll disorient you and disrupt the flow of the show. So, let's allow our guest to introduce himself properly for anyone who's not familiar with him and what he does. You run a blog post and you've appeared on the BBC on at least one occasion that I can think of. Is that right?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name's Mohammed. I run a blog, moansar.blogspot.com, which generally looks at political and social commentary of various sorts. I've come on the BBC a few times and talked generally on faith, interfaith, the place of religion and politics in society, I do a bit of radio and some other bits and pieces. So I kind of I work with a lot of community organisations and local government and various other bits and pieces. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. So, okay, you're in the United Kingdom. What would you say is the current atmosphere or climate between Christian leadership and Muslim leadership in the UK, and then the relation of the laity, the rank and file Christian and rank and file Muslims? I mean, on what points are they, doctrinal points or day-to-day business? What is the climate like there in England?
I think there's I'll talk on a personal level first. I mean, I work very closely with the Church of England diocese. I don't know how familiar you are with the structure of the Church of England and the Anglican setup here, but obviously for the longest time things have been very much owned, controlled, and under the stewardship of the Church here, and they've on the whole done a wonderful job in terms of looking after whether it's the welfare, education, it may be on charity or maybe on other issues, and have a very good relationship with them. We work very well together. On interfaith activities, obviously there are disagreements, but generally speaking, we try and come to common terms with Christian brothers and sisters on things we agree with. Things we disagree with, we try and talk about reasonably, politely, respectfully. But I think, faith in the modern society is at a very interesting juncture at this point in time, because there's a big rise in, whether you like to call it humanism, evolutionists. I hate to bracket everybody together because it's not right to generalize, but let's say anti-theists. And so we find Christians and Muslims coming to common terms on more and more grounds of common interest. So theologically, I think there will always be differences in place. It's not a huge problem for Muslims. I think it may be more of a problem for others than it is for Muslims. But generally speaking, we get along very well. I think the bigger tension is between faith and the anti-theists or the non-faith sector more than anything else.
Some comment? No? Okay. Well, whenever I watch an interfaith dialogue, and I can really never watch one to its completion, because you're aware that we're all atheists on the panel. From an atheist standpoint, it's really, not to be too indelicate, it's really quite nauseating, because as you said, the thing that they agree on is that they, have mutual antagonism towards people who who practice no religion or believe in no gods, So, it often, it seems when we so they sit down for a, Christian-Muslim dialogue especially, they, in the spirit of getting along with one another, they tread very far around issues of differences in their respective doctrines and just say, oh, yeah, I can't stand those atheists. Oh, me too. Oh, we have such in common. And yeah, like I said, from my perspective, I think I speak for a great deal of non-believers out there. It's painful. It's painful to watch because you know when I don't want them to break out into hand-to-hand combat up there, but I really enjoy more the combative approach between Christians and Muslims. Not in the sense that I enjoy watching them being rude to one another, but it is kind of amusing for them to engage in the scripture wars and things of that nature.
Ahmed Deedat.
I'm sorry, what?
Have you ever heard of Ahmed Deedat?
I've not.
Really? Oh, you've missed out. I used to love watching Ahmed Deedat. Yes,
he was
correct.
The precursor to Zakir Naik.
Zakir Naik. But Zakir Naik is nothing compared to... He's a false pretender compared to Ahmed Deedat. You should just go onto YouTube and watch him. Back in the 70s, he'd be arguing with these great Christian evangelicals like... what were they? I can't remember their names.
Probably the 80s. Probably the 80s.
Oh, 80s, okay.
People like Jimmy Swaggart.
Yes.
Jimmy Swaggart arguing? Yeah. Oh, that, I have to look that up.
Yeah, it's exactly.
I mean, okay, that was, what was the 80s? Mohammed, I found that very interesting because I saw what you said on the, what was it, the big question or the great question or whatever, but you never really went to town on what is it that you personally think that you and Christians actually agree on?
Do you know, I think we agree. Do you mean theologically, or do you mean in some sort of as you know? I'm all for scrutiny. I love debate and dialogue, and I think people should roll their sleeves up and get stuck in, and shouldn't be shy about discussing these things. But do you mean on a theological perspective, or do you mean more in terms of community relations and other things that are a bit more light or wishy?
No. I know that you both watch the same weather report and you have the same faith in the same weather report. But what I'm after is you maintain that the Quran gives you guidance towards a goal, all right? And the Christians believe the same. But there are different ways of doing this. If I look at a woman, a Christian woman, she is not required to cover up in any way. She is not required to pray in any specific language, in any specific direction, at any specific time. Whereas a Muslim woman has to do all these things. And this is why I was wondering if both of you, Christians and Muslims, are going towards a goal which they see being outlined in their scripture. Where is it that you agree with Christians that they are on the right path to their salvation?
I think first it's really important to know what Islam or the Islamic perspective in things like interfaith dialogue and in terms of freedom of religion and belief. I mean, I'm sure not all of your panel will be aware, or not all of your viewers will be aware. I'm father-in-law to a Catholic girl. My wife's family are Christian Lutheran, so I have Protestants in my family as well as Catholics. My mother's side are Sikh and Hindu, so I have a real mix of religions, and so interfaith for me has always been very, very interesting for the longest time. I mean, Islam is very clear in terms. Islam is very clear in terms of saying, which means come to common terms between us and them. Now, that may well be between one Muslim group and another Muslim group, or between Muslims and non-Muslims. So firstly, and it may well be between Muslims and atheists. Absolutely no issue we look at coming to common terms. The other most important directive within Islam is La ikra'a fi din, which means there's no compulsion in religion and belief. So under I would say an enlightened, a forward-thinking, a proper reading of Islam, there is no compulsion on anybody to believe anything they want to or don't want to. People should be absolutely free to believe as they see fit. So that is the overarching important aspect of what Islam brings to the table in terms of having a dialogue. If we then zoom into that a little bit and say, what does Islam have in common with Christianity? Very obviously, Islam has a view that world religions are part of a theological jigsaw puzzle, for want of a better phrase, that there were different prophets, different religions at the time who were different pieces of that jigsaw puzzle. And Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him, when somebody asked him what his role was, his mission, his purpose, he said, imagine all the prophets and messengers. He said, imagine a golden, a temple, a place of worship made of golden bricks, and all of the messengers and all of the prophets are the bricks of the temple, and in one corner there's a gap. And he says, I'm that brick. So it doesn't mean literally a brick, but obviously what he's saying is that there is a tapestry, and there are lots of messages, lots of prophets, lots of revelations, and he comes with the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle. So when we come specifically to Christianity, we have to understand the basic premise of the dialogue from an Islamic perspective. We don't come at it, the subject, looking at different cereal packets where you have different flavors, different brands, and you can pick and choose what you like and what fits and doesn't fit. We come from a relatively unique place, a relatively inclusive place. So we say that we are the only. Clearly, Islam will accept Christ as a messenger, as a prophet. We're the only non-Christian denomination that accepts Jesus as a mighty messenger of God. We're together on his miraculous birth, his life, risen to heaven, to come again as Messiah, things that will stick very much in the throat of my atheist friends, I'm sure. But we're together on very many things. Islam actually says that a righteous Christian has salvation. We don't say it's our way or the highway. So we're very, very encompassing, very, very clear on this issue.
No, you've come from a very theoretical, high-level approach. And then you've said what you don't do. But my question was, what do you agree on? Because you don't agree that Jesus was crucified. You see Jesus as just another prophet. Christians beg to differ. But this is not what I'm after. What I'm actually after is, because I said you believe you have salvation in your scripture, they believe that they have salvation in their scripture. So where do you in this process agree with anything that Christians do?
I have to say, I'm not sure it's exactly quite as clear cut as that, because it's not one of those issues where I say, look, I support the Springboks and I've got a green jersey, and therefore, we are the saved people, and you support another team and you have a yellow jersey and you're not the saved people.
I hate it when people still spot my accent after so many years.
Sorry, it's a bit of a giveaway. But it is, this isn't a situation where we say just because you are affiliated to a certain team, you qualify or don't qualify. So it's very much more based on your deeds, your actions. When I was younger, I had a very harsh view of non-believers and atheists. I thought, well, how can they be moral? Where is their sort of moral judgment? And I've had lots of discussions with a good friend of mine in the UK. His name's Robin Ince. He's quite big on the atheist scene, and he's a humanist. And actually, I've softened my view quite a lot. I think there are things that we disagree on. In terms of what do Muslims and Christians agree and disagree on, I mean, the crucifixion being a prime point. I may not agree in terms of, and I may see lots of holes in the crucifixion story, in the resurrection story from a scriptural basis, in terms of what Jesus, peace be upon him, says he did and didn't do, where he was and where he wasn't. And we can have that theological debate all day long, but I'm not, there isn't, I mean, I'm personally, I'm pretty easygoing. I mean, we let Christians worship as they see fit, and as long as people leave me to do my own thing, I don't really have a proverbial axe to grind with anybody.
I'm just curious.
Could you see it being the same God?
Right, I think it's undeniably the same God. I had a debate with Canon Vargason, who's based here in England, on BBC Radio about this, and I'm sure he may not mind me saying, but during the debate on the air, we raised the question about a God, and I posited the view that, look, it's one and the same creator, it's one and the same God. There isn't a Christian God or a Muslim God or a Buddhist God or a Hindu or Sikh God. There's one God, one and only the same. And after a bit of a pause, he agreed. Although privately afterwards he came to me and said he might be in trouble for saying that with his parishioners. But, absolutely, it's one God, one the same. No debate there, really. In Hebrew, Moses, peace be upon him, said Allah. In Aramaic, Jesus, peace be upon him, said Allah. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in Arabic said Allah. It really is just one and the same.
I have a quick question. You mentioned before the two teams with their respective jerseys, and one represents those who are saved and the other unsaved. And it recalled to me the image of Hamza Andreas Sortsi's in tears when recounting that he didn't think that his Christian family members would join him in heaven. He thought that they were damned because they would not join. And then you, of course, as you just said, you have in different branches of your family Christians, Hindus, and Sikhs, I believe you said.
Yeah.
What is their chance at salvation if they don't convert?
This is the thing about Islam, and it's a thing that's widely misunderstood, and it's unfortunately a myth that's being peddled by a lot of right-wing neo-Nazi and fascist organizations in Europe, which is that Islam somehow has this tentacular approach to political affairs, that somehow everybody has to convert, be under the yoke of Islam, which of course is complete nonsense and clearly not true. People don't have to convert to have salvation. Absolutely not. They can stick to their religion and belief. I think there are certain issues we can talk about in terms of believing in a God, in a deity, but from an Islamic perspective, as I've said, I did a debate at university a while back. We had something like 7 representatives from different Christian denominations of one sort and another. We had somebody from the Jewish tradition and myself, and luckily on that day I went last, and every representative stood up one after another and said, well, we are the chosen people, our way or the highway. One after another, we are the chosen people, we're the chosen people. Of course, my Jewish friends stood up and said the same, and I stood up and shrugged my shoulders, and I said, well, that's not the view we have. It's not our way or the highway. You can attain salvation through being righteous and living a good life. We can argue the intricacies of who receives a message, who doesn't receive a message. Can you in the English law, they have a phrase which is ignoramus lex non juris non excusat, which is ignorance of the law is no excuse. Do we have a similar thing in religion where if people don't know, then can you also hold them accountable? Well, not in Islam, not according to Islam. If people don't understand Islam, don't have the message, are ignorant, and there's a level of accountability which they are not held responsible for, if that makes sense.
Are you starting a revolution?
It's the first time I've ever heard Hamza Sortis referred to as a neo-Nazi.
I don't think that's funny.
I haven't referred to Hamza as that. I just like to get that clear now.
You seem like a pretty easygoing guy, and you said there's no compulsion in religion. I was wondering what your personal opinion is on Muslims who apostatize.
That's up to them, isn't it? I mean, there's no business of mine. I mean, God, I mean, that's a personal choice. I think if people want to, apostasy in Islam is a very clear thing. There are a lot of things when people debate or want to talk to Muslims about Islam, which is causes great difficulty, and it's a word I tweeted about this word, which is conflationism, which is often taking 2 or 3 or more unrelated issues, interweaving them together in a way which actually obfuscates the clear and true meaning. So, for example, in Islam it's relatively clear that social justice, living together in a peaceful, plural society is important, whether you believe, whether you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or whatever religion you might believe. And so on that basis, there is real clarity in looking at building a harmonious society. Now, if somebody uses their sexuality, their belief, their lack of belief, their any type of belief or way of life they have to cause a conflict in society, then that is going to cause great difficulty. So, I mean, I'm somebody who often is asked about sexuality, and I often say to people, yeah, I have gay and lesbian friends. I'm an advocate for LGBT rights. I have been for over 15 years. I don't see anything in that conflicts with Islam. And again, I've got people I know and friends who they probably would regard as being apostate. It's a personal decision. It's between them and God whether they believe there's a God or not. So I'm pretty chilled out with these things. I mean, if people want to believe, let them believe. If they don't, they don't. I mean, you can't compel people to believe something. Either you believe it on its merits or you don't.
Okay, allow me to interject really quick. Someone has just posted a verse from the Quran itself. It's Surah 3, verse ayat 85. It says, "And whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will never be accepted of him, and in the hereafter he will be one of the losers." Now, I think that this illustrates something that is very indicative of why there's so much objection to the damnation element in Christianity and Islam, and that is that it's perfectly understandable how, despite the differences, we can get along in the sandbox of the physical world. But it seems that regardless of charitable feeling and earthly tolerance, that we're going to be going separate ways after we die. And I think that there's a great deal that can be gleaned from the Quran and the other writings, the hadiths and tafsir and history and so forth and so on, that will say that Muslims will go one way, and that there's one door labeled Muslims, and then the other that is labeled miscellaneous, and we all go that way. So what do you say to that?
Well, obviously, I'm not a Hifz al-Quran, I'm not Hafiz al-Quran. I haven't got the Quran memorized, and obviously I was only made aware of the topic of the show 2 minutes before coming on tonight. So I haven't been able to prepare any written topics. So I can only talk to you from my personal knowledge and experience.
Well, that's fine. That's fine.
Which is, I hope, reasonable. I hope I'm going to have to take a break in a couple of minutes because I'm a bit overdue for my Maghrib sunset prayers. But
okay, if you're overdue, please excuse yourself whenever you're ready.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I'll just give a quick answer, then I'll take a break and I'll pop back shortly. But and I do hope we're not going to have a verse rebuttal and contextualizing debate, because it is, honestly, it's so boring and very staid, and I hope your viewers are a bit more erudite and interesting than want to have a boring tit for tat on what does this verse say. Well, that's not the context. Well, that's not the Arabic word. Well, this is the right Arabic word. I don't know if that's an interesting enough or contemporary enough way of looking at religion and belief in a secular society nowadays. But I mean, the question you're asking, I think, is does Islam have a view that salvation is attained through Islam? I think that's the heart of your question. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you know about Islam, I mean, if somebody doesn't know nowadays in our school, and I work quite heavily in education in our school system here, unfortunately, and it may be something we can talk about later on. We have a problem with the rise of the far right in the West, in the US, and in Europe, because there is so much ignorance about Islam, and some of the great thinkers, some of the great critical thinkers of the past who introduced concepts like humanism to the West. Humanism was something that the Christian church was utterly unprepared with, and utterly unprepared for, and they were not willing to acknowledge that there's any level of sphere of consciousness, philosophy, understanding, deep thinking outside that of the Christian church. And of course, it was the work of the the great Muslim thinkers of the time who really pioneered some of these areas. And I think when we look at the scientific method, when we look at the great work that was done by the Muslims of the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, even 12th century, this laid a foundation down. Now, what is more of an interesting and compelling debate is if Muslims have been given a clear understanding of their deen, of their way of life, then for them the argument is clear. But why do people have such a lack of understanding of Islam when it has given such a massive contribution to the West, to the US, to Europe, which is the foundation arguably of our systems of government, our system of law, system of medicine, science, technology, so many areas of our different learning and understanding. It seems that there is a closer alliance between Islam and humanism and other areas than with other theological and philosophical perspectives. Now the question is, for those people who have that view, who have never had a clear understanding of Islam, do they have salvation? Can they be judged fairly on something of which they have no knowledge? Can they be judged fairly on something where if you were 10 years old and went to school, you wouldn't really have understood Islam? You wouldn't have had it explained to you in a way you would have been able to understand. And I think we have to approach these in a more contemplative way. Now, I'm going to just throw that out there to float it. I'm going to take a break, and if so, I'll come back shortly.
Yes, of course.
All right. I'll see you in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now he's got to go attend his prayers. Let's. I mean, as much as I'd like to come back to a lot of what he said, let's not direct anything at him in his absence. You know what I mean? Let's use some common sense.
May I
Please.
When he comes back, may I address, because this is
address it now. I mean, we'll get. Go ahead.
No. I wanted to address some of the things he said, especially with what he just said about the basis of humanism and the scientific method. Can I do that?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll recap it for him, I guess.
Oh, no. When he comes back, can I take him to issue on these things that he said, or would that be segueing into his subjects that you don't want to go into?
It's fine.
Fantastic.
Any thoughts from Rash or Stop? Well, I actually might take a caller here in a second, unless the caller only wanted to talk to our guest, in which case he'll have to leave.
Do you guys realize that this is a revolution?
Yes. I mean, he has no idea. He seems to have absolutely no concept of ijma', consensus of the scholars, which universally, for the longest time, has been that the punishment for apostasy is death. That's ijma'. That's consensus of the scholars.
Yeah, but the whole thing with it doesn't matter which religion, is always the same God leading to the same salvation. Excuse me, that doesn't work.
Yeah, I have to say.
Certainly doesn't work with paganism, does it? Or polytheism. There's no compulsion in religion, but and we need to go easy on other religions. But does that account to worshipping rocks, for example, or should we follow Muhammad's example and go into the temple and smash all the rock gods and tell them that they should not associate equals with Allah? I mean, surely an Islamic State isn't going to permit temples to be opened where people believe that rocks are gods, are they?
Yeah, it's the first I've heard. This guy, I mean, let's not say anything too venturesome in his absence, but so far, he makes Dr. Syed look like a Salafi. I mean, you remember, I don't know how many people watched last show, but we were pretty incredulous. I mean, Ibrahim Syed was such a nice guy, you know? It's like so many other religious people. If it was up to him, and it was my personal moral code with his personal moral code, we could, of course, come to a compromise. But, when you acknowledge the discrepancy between what he's talking about and what the documentation actually says, it's a complete shutout. I mean, at one point, Dr. Syed even said, well, you can pray 5 times a day, or you can say your 5 prayers in 3 increments. The morning prayer, then you say the 2 other prayers, then you say the 2 other prayers. And I thought, how is he going to hold a candle in a debate with anyone who's from a remotely orthodox school? Even if someone could never in any regard be described as extreme. If someone, for example, I talked to someone, he's an ex-Muslim, and he was a Salafi, and he said, I never thought of myself as a bad guy. I was just being very, dogmatic about a good thing. I was being very devoted. And, how could he talk to someone who is like that? Someone who is very, trying to be very pious or orthodox as a result, doesn't have an angry or hateful bone in his body, and you go up to him and you say, well, you can say 5 prayers or 3 prayers or, in 3 different times. It doesn't matter. That would just make him seem lax. I think that many more conservative Muslims would just dismiss that with a wave of their hand.
I think an interesting point was the discussion about how can you punish people who don't know about Islam, who haven't been taught about it and so on. Basically, that if you don't know it, you can't be punished for it.
Yeah.
Now, what about people like Hamza sources who believe they do know it and is an international speaker, and this person is saying that anyone who apostatizes in an Islamic state should be beheaded. Now, that obviously completely contrasts to what Muhammad says, as Muhammad Ansar. Jack, can you mute your mic for a minute, please? That obviously completely contrasts to what Muhammad Ansar was saying, that, you know, they're free to do whatever they want. Now, Muhammad Ansar believes that he understands Islam, and Hamza Sources believes that he understands Islam, but they obviously both understand it in a completely different way. So, what if Hamza participates in beheading someone for apostatizing, and he's wrong? Does he go to hell, or does he have a get-out clause that he didn't understand Islam?
Yeah. So, Jack, welcome to the show. What do you have for us today?
Hello.
Hi.
First, I want to welcome Rationalizer for coming back. Cheers.
What are you drinking there?
Just some whiskey.
Oh, okay.
So,
Salvation on its way.
today's topic is Islam versus Christianity, right?
Yes, but you can talk about whatever you want.
Okay. First, I will, because I'm ex-Muslim, okay? Because I think Christianity is morally is better than Islam. But logically, Islam is better. Because when I thought to leave Islam, I thought first about Christianity, but it doesn't make any sense to me. So I think in short, Islam is more logical than Christianity, but Christianity is more like its teaching is more morally accepted.
Yeah, you know the weird thing is, I was raised in a Christian household, and then I read the Bible, and then I said, okay, well, this doesn't hold me water, and I left. And what's funny is that even today, when I read about other religions, the flaws are just so much more easily apparent. Whereas often things about the Christian doctrine and the Bible itself, I don't notice until someone points that out to me. You know, someone will say, well, if this story of the Bible is true, then X, Y, and Z, and then it'll just hit me. It's like, yeah, that's stupid, and it was stupid all along. It was stupid ever since I was a kid. I just didn't, for whatever reason, it was just so ingrained to me to accept these things. So, like, I read the Ramayana recently, and there were some Hindus who were saying, no, these aren't myths, these are actual history. And I said, mate, look, do you really believe that an officer of the Vanners, the kingdom of the monkey men, jumped over the ocean 900 miles, and then as he's jumping and flying through the air, some sort of spirit monster confronts him, and he has a conversation with it as he's flying through the air, and then all this other crazy, crazy stuff that goes on in these. I mean, and it was an interesting story. I mean, I enjoyed reading the Ramayana, but the idea that someone doesn't see that and say, no, that's completely ridiculous and retarded. But, like I said, it cuts both ways. So do you think that might impact your reasoning, like stories you were raised with don't seem as immediately ridiculous?
Yeah, that's a good point, because as you said, if you grow up like in a Christian family or a Muslim family, these stories will be like familiar to you. Then it will not be like it will be logical or familiar to you. For me, like I grew up in a Muslim family, so Muslim stories will be familiar to me. And when I hear about Christian, I say, like Jesus was killed and then he was came to life again after 3 days. It's ridiculous. I cannot believe that. But in the same, there is some stupid Muslim stories, but I am familiar with them, so it doesn't seem like very stupid to me. So it's a good point, right?
Rash, Kling, stop.
I think that if you look at, if you compare Christianity and Islam, I would say that Islam is certainly more in line with how Judaism was to start. If you read through the Old Testament, you know, people are being stoned, and as in stoned to death, not drugs, and their babies are having their heads smashed on rocks and all kinds of things. And it, to me, came across as a really horrific and cruel God. And then all of a sudden in part 2, God's gone through some reformation process, and everybody's loved and everybody should be forgiven for just about everything. And then Islam comes along, and especially if you take into account hadiths, we're back to people being stoned and killed and for homosexuality and adultery and so on. So to me, Islam is closer to how it originally was. I think that Christianity is certainly the odd one out. I remember taking religious education at school, and although I didn't grow up with Christian parents, I remember listening to all these claims from these different religions, and I remember sitting there and thinking, these religions are all absolutely ridiculous, except of course Christianity. And for me, now, I didn't even know what Christianity was about. I believed Christianity wasn't ridiculous, even though I hadn't read the Bible. I hadn't been taught it in religious education. The only introduction I'd had to it was singing songs at about the age of 7 about how lovely Jesus was for dying for me.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. If you were to... I'm sorry, did
Religious education.
Okay, never mind. When you line up all of the different prophets of the major world religions that are known, you know, like when Buddha sits underneath the Bodhi tree and he meditates and he says, I just found enlightenment. And people ask him, well, how do you know? How can we know that you know? And he says, trust me. And people say, oh, okay. You know, I mean, he had a very easy sell. It's like, I have attained this higher degree of consciousness and have nothing to show for it. And he's like, that sounds legit. You know, or what is the internetism seems legit. Yeah, and then like when I look at the claims of other you know, religious teachers, it just says, okay, well, I can look at this, and this. It's like, it's obvious that from my perspective at least, that he's making it all up. It has every hallmark of him making it up. But then I think Jesus takes the cake over all of them put together. You know, it's like we have like an interview, and all the prophets are in line. He says, "Okay, well, what's your deal?" He says, I'm Buddha. I achieved Satori. You know, I'm you know, Muhammad. I got the last revelation from the God of Abraham. I'm Moses. I parted the Red Sea. And then Jesus finally walks up. He's like, "Okay, so what's your deal?" It's like, "I'm God." People bought it. People believed him. People said, "Oh, all right, that sounds reasonable."
You know,
how can anyone?
I've heard arguments about. I'm not looked into Christianity much, but does Jesus literally say, "I am God"? He doesn't, does he?
The verses used to come to that conclusion is there's a verse that says, "I and the Father are one," and some things like that. And then, of course, he's described as a son. In my personal opinion, I think that the Arians, a now extinct branch of Christianity, were actually on the money, and that he wasn't trying to say that he was God in the flesh, the way you know, nearly all contemporary Christians today say. Klingschor, you had a comment?
Oh, I don't think Jesus even existed as a person. So.
Oh no, I don't mean. Did Jesus really say it? What I mean is, do the Gospels say that Jesus said it?
Oh, yeah. And even then, I used to, because you remember I mentioned Ahmed Dida, and he talks about this, actually, in his debates with Christians. And I remember watching and and like, he did a fantastic job of really, you know, ripping into the, I mean, he was a nasty man. He was a bigot. He was just a fuckwit, really. But when it came to criticizing the Bible, he had some really good arguments, I felt, at the time. And one of them was this, and that he said He said to his opponent, what was it? Give me one verse in the Bible where Jesus says that I am God. And then the man who he is arguing with is only able to, he brings forth this one verse which he tried to conflate. It's easy, a simple child would be able to know that Jesus was God. A lot of people always do that. Even a child could work it out. It's kind of logical fallacy. But it was just it was like when you actually listen to the verse, it's sort of like, really? And from that kind of vagary, you extrapolate that Jesus was God. It's just like... Yeah.
The thing that never made sense to me about that was Jesus is on the cross, and if he is God, he effectively was pinned on the cross, looked up to the heavens and said, "Oh me, why have I forsaken myself?"
Maybe it was a moment of forgetfulness. Someone had a question for Jack. They wanted me to ask why you left Islam.
It's a long story. Do you have time for that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so...
Give us the summarized version.
Okay, I wasn't very religious at first. My family is not religious. But I was believing in, like God and Quran and everything I believe. But I wasn't very religious. But I was like a secular Muslim, okay? Even all my family, all they are secular. But then I went to college. I studied chemistry, okay? Then we have biology subject. We studied biology and evolution. Then it's all emotional. I decided from my heart to know the truth. Is evolution is true or not? So I searched in the internet and books and everything. I really want to know, do we really evolve from other creatures, or were we created from God? But after I searched long time, I come to decision that evolution is really true. So I started to question religion, and I searched in internet, and I found other, especially in YouTube, like Hassan, Hassan channel.
Yeah.
Yeah. After I convinced 100% that evolution is true, I started to question religion. So I started to look in atheism, Christianity, and every other religion. So I become skeptical about God, and so I become atheist.
Okay. We're going to let you go for now, Jack. We got a couple more callers, and Mr. Ansar should be joining us again shortly. I don't know if he's watching the stream. I'll poke him on Skype and see if he's ready. So thanks a lot for your call, Jack. Take care. So long.
One last point, if you have time for that.
I'm sorry?
I have one last point.
Oh, yeah, okay. As long as it's quick.
Yeah. As long as you have your topic about Christianity and Islam, one thing about Christianity is, if evolution is true, Christianity will not be true, because Christianity is based on the salvation and the first, like Adam and the first sin. Okay. So if there is no Adam, there is no first sin. If there is no first sin, there is no meaning of Jesus being sacrificed himself for our sins. So Christianity in a big trouble in this point. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks a lot. Take care.
Okay,
wow. I've never heard it being said so clear and so succinct that it's actually down to evolution. Wow.
Well, no wonder. I mean, I just somebody forwarded me a video by Nephilim Free where he's arguing with a bunch of people on Skype, and he of course declares victory. His channel's a fortress of censorship, and he only comments and praise. So he's having this victory parade, but of course any neutral observer would see that he's just embarrassed himself. But yeah, I mean it's one of the reasons why cosmology and evolution, which they seem to think are the same thing, why these things are such critical, objectives for them to seize upon, at least, for the very orthodox. Mohammed, welcome back. We tried to steer the conversation a little bit away, and we took some callers because, of course, you weren't here to offer counterpoint. We didn't want to talk too much at length about what you were talking about. Previous caller was ex-Muslim. He was talking about why he left and some other things. Oh, one last point on what Jack was talking about. The thing about he mentioned briefly at the end, original sin and Jesus dying for sins. He was focused more on the role of original sin, which I know doesn't feature in Islam at all. But the thing about Christianity is anyone here watched Casablanca, where they have you have Rick, who owns Rick's Americana bar, and then you have Ferrari, who is a gentleman owns another, and they have a bet or a deal or something, and now Ferrari owes Rick's Americana cartons of cigarettes. That's because he lost a bet or something. Okay, so Rick sells the bar to Ferrari, and he says, hey, remember, you still owe the bar these many cartons of cigarettes. And he says, okay, I'll remember to pay it to myself. And that just seems to illustrate perfectly why the whole Jesus dying for our sins makes no sense. Because, how can a God be so schizophrenic? Or have multiple personalities where he's like what Rationalizer was saying about why have I forsaken myself? I don't regret. Why am I doing this? How could someone only be able to do something, only be able to give themselves permission to do something if they inflict an injury on themselves that will immediately heal? It completely falls apart as far as I'm concerned. But
this is the ongoing discussion within Christianity. I remember I once went for a forum, and in all innocence, I asked the question, because it was some Ascension Day. I asked, is Ascension Day the day when Jesus Christ was supposed to have gone up to heaven? Did he ascend physically or just spiritually? And this started a whole onslaught of insults because they thought I was putting the mickey, because this is one of the big unsolved mysteries in Christianity. And I was just asking this question because I really didn't know. And this is one of the ongoing discussions, the same as the story with is he God or not, physically or spiritually, or if yes, in what way?
Yeah, I think it's just to add something now. I mean, I'm not. I hope I'm not a hired gun tonight to come and take down Christianity, because that's not.
Not at all.
That's not what I'm here for, but
I like the expression.
Yeah, quite dodgy coming from a guy with a beard and a hat online, I know. But from my personal experience and my personal understanding, there are a lot of corrupted teachings in Christianity, and I had an interesting debate on Twitter today where we were debating three main topics. I don't know if you saw. One was pork and the position of swine meat in the scriptures. A second was Christ and the position of Christ in his religion, and the last one was about Paul and how Paul is the single-handedly he is the largest author of the Bible. And it's very difficult to get your head around the fact that somebody who never met Christ, never knew him, arguably had some funky dreams one evening, and no disrespect to any of my Christian friends and brothers and sisters who are looking, but I'm talking very from a personal perspective. But somebody who had some funny dreams, then you take that person's word and you say, well, that overrides somebody who you believe to be at least a messenger, if not a prophet, and if not possibly even God or be divine. And it actually pulls at some of the heart of some of the core aspects of Christianity, because we have a lot of Christians who look at Christianity from a theological perspective and they say, well, clearly Jesus is God, and I often say to them, well, look, if you show me somewhere where Jesus said, I'm God, worship me. I've got no problem being a Christian, and here I am still with my beard and my hat and my robes. So there are a lot of strange teachings that go on in Christianity. I think when you look at issues of the crucifixion, when Christ says after the crucifixion, and he goes to the upper room, and his friends see him, and he says Shalom Aleichem. Now, whether you believe in Christ or not, let's take it for what it is, a historical record of not like a Galaxy Quest historical document, but, kind of a more interesting historical record. When he goes down, people say, well, where have you been? And they check his hands, and he says, bring me some honeycomb and boiled fish. He says, I'm hungry. And they say, where have you been? And he says, well, as Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, so I was in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And when you ask Christians, what does he mean? Because he refers to this earlier on in the Gospels, where has he been for 3 days and 3 nights? But they don't understand the question. Because we ask them, well, if he says he's been away for 3 days and 3 nights, that includes Friday night, Saturday night, and a Sunday when he's resurrected. So either the Gospel's wrong or Jesus is wrong. And of course, it's beyond belief that Jesus can be wrong, which means only one thing. He's been disappeared since Thursday. Well, if he's been disappeared since Thursday, who was crucified? I think there are lots of really interesting areas of debate that I'm happy to have with Christians, and I think that skeptics alike will have very strong views on this. I think for me the biggest area of concern I have is there are a lot of ex-Christians and a lot of skeptics and a lot of atheists who quite rightly are questioning what they've been taught. And they say, guys, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand. This fails logic and reasoning. If you hear of a fundamentalist Christian say, well, we can't believe in dinosaurs because nothing can predate, I don't know, Adam minus 6 days, for example, it's a bit of an issue because science and reasoning and rationality tells you something different. Well, a Muslim turns around and says, well, if you read your Bible and Genesis correctly, as you should read the Quran correctly, it talks about 6 ayom, 6 periods of time, 6 epochs, 6 eras. There could be 1 million years, 10 million years. Islam has no problem rationalizing, Jurassic Park, other than it was the second and third films were not as good. We've got no problem rationalizing 63, million years or billion years. No problem with that at all whatsoever.
Can I just, before you carry on, can I just say though that I've heard this argument that it's 6 periods of time. Now, obviously, if they're a period of time, there'd be no point in saying there were 6 of them unless they were equal amounts. For example, you'd say 6 centimetres. You wouldn't say 6 distances. One of them's a millimetre, one of them's a centimetre, and one of them's a mile. If it's 6 units, then there should be 6 equal units. Because if they're different lengths, then why were there 6? Because
that is like saying, that's like saying I've got 6 garments and saying, well, there have to be all 6 shirts or 6 socks. Why can't there be 6 different things? I mean,
no, it's not the same. It's because what we're talking about is units of measurement. A garment isn't a unit of measurement. If you've got an amount of time, right, and I say there are 6 X's, or there are 6 yoms, or there are 6 lyoms, or whatever you want to say, right? If they're not equal lengths, why are there 6?
A good question. Let me answer you. If the word in Hebrew and the word in Arabic is ayom or yom, and yom can mean, in inverted commas, a period of time, is an unspecified period of time. It can just mean an epoch. Now, we know from science that an epoch, different eras of prehistory, if you want to call it that, or prehistoric age, the eras and the periods of time are not all of equal length. Some will be 10 million years, some will be 2 million years, some will be 20 million years. So, ayom, the word itself means an undefined era, a period of time, an epoch. So if somebody says 6 ayoms, it doesn't really seem like a big deal. I really think that there are probably bigger fish to fry, but we can sit here talking about yom, eom, eras and epochs if you like, but I don't know. I'm not convinced it's a huge issue. I'm not
I
going
must
to
say I was enjoying your description of Paul. Person who authored most of the Bible, had a few strange dreams, and never met Jesus. Of course, from an atheist point of view, Muhammad never met Allah. He had a few crazy dreams, and he authored all of the Quran.
Al-Isra wa al-Miraj. If I said that
yeah,
correctly.
look, you're entitled to your belief. Even if I disagree with it, you're entitled to your belief. I'm not here to kind of hammer you down and say, look, nobody says we have to believe everything. I mean, I'm going to be honest, quite straightforward with you. Look, we live in a period of time where there are huge social problems to deal with. Now, that might be social corruption, social injustice, governments, unequal, unfair, iniquitous trade agreements, wars, invasion, crime. I would say sexualization of children, the abuse of alcohol, and and we have so many horrific issues. I mean, even in the US and in all of the Western world, we're seeing huge, great transfers of wealth from the lowest social classes, the poorest in society, to the richest in society. It's a huge wealth grab, and the way I look at it is to say, well, we can sit and debate aeons and epochs. We can sit and debate whether Paul was cool or whether he was particularly uncool, especially after he was circumcised as an adult, after converting, after he met Poppia, and then that coloured his whole judgment and the way about going things historically. We can talk about those things, or actually I hope that the Islamic perspective, which says, look, there is absolute freedom of religion and belief. If you want to be a Muslim, if you don't want to be a Muslim, if you want to drink, smoke, do whatever you want to do, believe whatever you want to believe, you don't have to believe anything. But what we should be looking at the minute is the bigger fish to fry, which is saying, well, how can we create a society where people of belief and people of no belief can come together to tackle some of these really big issues?
Okay,
now, for me personally,
the problems that you're describing are certainly serious, but they've always been with us and will be with us probably indefinitely in at least some form. So I don't think it is wise for us to. I don't think it's wise for us to say that we'll postpone certain discussions until these problems are solved, because they may never be. And like I said,
additionally,
go ahead.
Additionally, I think that the way that we approach these issues differs depending on the smaller issues. Like, if Islam is true, then the way to deal with these issues would be different. For example, dealing with crime. The Quran says, chop off the hands of thieves, for example. Whether or not you agree with that or not, that's just what and of course in traditional Islamic law, that's how it manifested, with different degrees of nuance. Whereas a different perspective would be in, for example, most, other law systems in, for example, Europe and whatever, have a different approach, which is that, well, preventing crime by other means. So I think that definitely these smaller issues are important in shaping how we approach the bigger issues.
No, I would entirely agree with that. I mean, I would never recommend that any of the debates or discussions should be postponed, because we can't often get onto the bigger things because the smaller things are getting in the way. And often the language of the smaller things is getting in the way, and often the context and the environment in which we talk gets in the way. I think, however, for me, a far more compelling debate is, how do people of faith and not of faith find common ground? How can we have a secular answer to some of these questions, when I believe that Islam offers solutions to the problems of society, and a staunch secularist or non-theist or anti-theist will say, well, I'm unwilling to look at any options that are created in the public space which come from a theological background. I think that's I think a compelling debate to have.
I'm gonna stop this because we're gonna take. We have some callers who've been waiting quite a long time. I won't continue about the Yom thing, but earlier on you said, let's not get down into the nitty-gritty of the Arabic, and then you stepped on a landmine by saying Yom means eight. I think everyone on the panel, because we do this regularly, we all started slavering at the chance to to get you on that one. I know I certainly did. I've actually been reading the Quran in its Arabic. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go. But believe me, I could go on at length about this. But we'll drop it for now because Ali Abbas would like to ask a question to the panel, or he has some comments regarding blasphemy.
Hey guys.
Hey, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'll have to end the... Okay, 1 second. All right, sorry, I was getting a lot of feedback from the Blog TV website I was on. All right, just for full disclosure, guys, I don't want to show the video. My room is not in a state in which I could honorably show video. Anyway, I just got a request. Anyway, so the first thing, I just want to, full disclosure, I'm a former Muslim myself. It's not been too long since I've become non-Muslim, right? But I wanted, the non-Muslims, it's not a big deal. But Muhammad, I wanted to ask you, you sound as if you're living in the UK. I'm not in UK, but are you Hanafi? Are you a Hanafi Sunni? Because you're Sunni, you're not Shia, definitely. But are you a Hanafi Sunni?
Is it important?
Yeah, because I will bring up issues related to Imam Abu Hanifa then, right? Because I don't know if you don't accept, if I bring up the words of, if you're a Salafi, I'll talk about what Sheikh Albani said or Ibn Uthaymeen said, right? But if you're Hanafi, I want to see, you want to have a common dialogue, I want to see what you accept, right? What do you accept is true?
I think we've spoken before on Twitter, haven't we? I think
never. I don't have a Twitter account.
No. Okay. So I thought there was a friend called Ali Abbas who used to come in and ask lots of questions on Twitter. No, I think if you have questions, I think you should ask your questions. I think if they're questions generally, you should ask the questions generally. I think my particular disposition shouldn't really make any difference to that.
Right. Okay. But
can I interject?
Sure. Yeah.
Because, see, I think the issue is, for example, you said that there's no compulsion in religion, but the reality is that the ijma, the consensus of the majority of jurists throughout history, has been that if one leaves Islam, the punishment is death. For the Hanafis, the Shafis, the Malikis, the Hanbalis. So you're coming from this, I think it's great. I think you've got a very progressive sounding perspective. I think that's fantastic. But it has absolutely no parity with traditional Islam as it has been traditionally practiced by the orthodox schools. And so I guess the issue is if you do identify with, for example, the Hanafis, if you view yourself as part of that madhab, why is it that your views are completely diametrically opposed to theirs? I think that's what we're looking into here.
Not just sorry to interject, right? Yeah.
If I can ask that one first, I think it's a very fair question. I don't know if my views are that contrary. I mean, they may be contrary to your understanding from the sources that you've read of what you consider to be, traditionalist Islam. But we have very contemporary modern scholars like Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, who is considered to be the preeminent scholar in Europe. Also, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and many others who all have a very similar view. I wouldn't dare put myself, in an elevated state with them, other than to say there are many scholars all over the world that have the view that the punishment for apostasy is not death. So I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm very grateful for your. I'm not sure I need a atheist-approved stamp on my backside anywhere, but and I'm very grateful for what you've said. But I think my view is pretty. I don't know. I take Islam as I see it. I read the Quran. I study a little. I read a little. I do what I can. I'm a very busy activist on a lot of different areas of social engagement, education, and interfaith, equalities. There are a lot of problems you have in society. So I probably don't study as much as I should, and I wish I could study more. But I'm a simple guy. I deal in simple issues. I'm pretty logical, rational. If something doesn't meet the scientific test for me, then see you later. It has to fit with my rational mind. I was born and bred in the West. I'm a British person, and I see things through those eyes. So I don't see it as a particularly weird or far out view. If it is a far out view, then maybe so. But often, as we see in many things, society, faith, religion, lots of different areas of social life are influenced from the fringes. They're very rarely influenced from the center.
Someone had a question. Someone had a question for our caller, Ali, and would like to know, as with the previous caller, why you left Islam.
I did research. I learned about Islam. I was actually, I don't want to get into details about my sect and stuff like that, but I was actually, I was born in the Middle East and I lived there for most of my life, and then when I moved to Canada for a while, I actually became kind of super religious, like for a while, right? And then I actually learned Arabic, and I started translating the earliest texts, which had been translated into English. Yet I was translating some texts from Arabic into English, and that's when, like, you know, there comes a point where you have to realize, you know, either you believe in God or you believe in truth, right? And then there's just that much nonsense you can put up with before you have to switch. Before you have to realize, like, you know, like, yeah, maybe I get my ass roasted in hell for the rest of eternity, but I can't put up with this nonsense. I mean, I always had issues with some of the moral aspects of Islam, and to add to what the previous caller said, like, you know, he's talking about Christianity being more moral, but Islam being more logical. I don't think he expressed himself as clearly as he should. I think he's right in the sense that if you look at the jurisprudential aspects of Christianity is much more tolerant. Islam, even though I completely reject Islam, and if I had to choose, like, you know, someone told me, put a gun to my head and said, okay, everyone on the planet Earth will either become Muslim tomorrow or Christian tomorrow, which one do you want? I would choose Christianity in a heartbeat, right? So I prefer Christianity as a practice. But in terms of theological foundation, Islam is rock solid. I mean, there are issues. I know people will come up with, there are lots of issues, but relatively, I mean, among religions, Islam is theologically, Islam is pretty strong. And except for the Salafis, among Sunnis, Muslims have a very strong philosophical background. The Kalam groups in Islam are actually fairly good. I still read their books because they're actually that good, right? So I actually left because there's some moral issues, and I mean, there's so many issues now. Like, on hindsight, I think, okay, this is all crazy, right? I mean, like the historical events. Like, we know now that the Exodus didn't really happen. We know now that when Muhammad says, oh, the Jews used to fast on Ashura, which is nonsense, right? Like, they didn't even know what the Ashura was. Initially, Muhammad said, okay, you face towards Jerusalem. And when the Jews were opposed to Muhammad in Medina, he said, no, wait. The Kaaba is the first house of worship. And that's the only house of worship you should turn towards. And it was created by Adam, right? And wait a second. If that was the original, the Bayt al-Atiq, as the Quran says, it was the original house of worship, then why did you make us turn towards Jerusalem for 18 or 20 months, or like 16 months, and pray towards that direction, right? So, on hindsight, like, lots of these historical aspects make no sense whatsoever. But, like, in terms of theology, I'm talking about pure theology. There's a God. He has no physical form. He's a transcendent being, basically. But he created the universe and he controls the universe. That makes much more sense than Christianity, where you have God, who's the Son, who's the Holy Spirit, but they're not each other, but they're all one. So Christianity, if you want to go into the theology, it makes no sense. So anyway, having said so, that's the reason. There are lots of reasons, but evolution was one of the reasons. The treatment of gays and apostates, that was another one of the reasons. Muhammad, okay, sorry to switch topics again, but at least tell me you accept the Sahihain, right? Like, do you even accept that the Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim are authentic?
The hadith science is a particular area of interest for me.
No, but not.
Let him finish.
Sorry, I'm just only talking Bukhari and Muslim. I don't care about anything else, or just not even Muslim if you don't like them, but just Bukhari or Bukhari and Muslim. Come on, just these two issues. Do you even accept that these are authentic? Like, are they proper authentic or are they not authentic?
If I can answer you, if that's all right, you have to just
interrupting, right? Because I don't want to go on to a different topic. Sorry about that. Please continue.
That's fine. All right. So if I can answer you, I think hadith science is a particular area of interest, and it takes years of study, because you have to remember that the hadith, so to speak, are, for want of a better phrase, they're witness statements. They are statements from people who were around the Prophet, who knew the Prophet, who heard the information. And generally speaking, most of the information has been through some pretty rigorous testing in terms of passing rules of hearsay. So, for example, if you had the information firsthand, that's fine. If it was second or third hand, it would have to be verified and scrutinized pretty heavily. But as we know, there are things which are in the hadith which are very clearly questioned in modern society. I'll give you an example, because hopefully this will help to explain my point. One of the allegations put towards Muslims very often is a very unfortunate and sad claim against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that he consummated or married a young child who was 9 years old. Now,
he consummated when he was 9, right? But she was actually
let him continue. Let him continue. But I just like to note that this is usually an issue that we steer as far away from as we can, just to the utter sensitivity of it.
I know.
Please continue.
But I only want to touch on it for the basis just to highlight a point, which is that some people rely on some hadith and say, well, actually, this hadith says this and this hadith says that. And then actually, when you drill down and scrutinize it a bit more, we realize that the hadith was transmitted from somebody who was an elderly gentleman, probably in his 80s, and was recounting what his father had told him when he was a young man. And so actually, and then it requires a deeper analysis, it requires deeper scholarly, intellectual analysis of the subject to think, well, actually, what is the nature of this hadith? So there are hadiths which are weak, there are hadiths which are sound, there are hadiths which are questionable, there are hadiths which on the first hand might have been retransmitted and bounced around the houses, if you like, for hundreds of years. And actually now, with further analysis and further scholarly interpretation, we know, for example, that the Prophet's wife, in this circumstance, was between the age of 15 and 20 when she actually was married. Some say as old as 18 or 20. So I'm not one for generalizing. I know I do sometimes as a bit of a laugh, but we're looking at these issues. You cannot say that all of the hadiths, all of the collection of witness statements, it would be illogical to say all of the witness statements are sound, because some of them will be clearly more sound than others.
Can I make a quick observation? I'd just like to make a quick observation. If modern interpretations are saying that she could be 15, 18 or so on, it's very unfortunate for the 9-year-olds of the past few hundred years who have had sex with adults, because people have believed that, in the past have believed that 9 was the legal age to have sex with your wife in Islam.
I'll answer that just by saying this. The legal age in Vatican City is 13. The legal age in Spain is 13. The legal age in Islam, the legal age according to Sharia, is whatever the legal age is in the country. So if the legal age in the UK is 16 or 18, the Sharia takes a stance behind the legal age, or behind the law of England and Wales. And as a legal advocate, I've no problem at all saying that that's the case. Now, we don't have any evidence that suggests, or no direct, other than very loose anecdotal evidence to suggest that that's an issue. We know within the UK, for example, 95% of paedophilia is, and this is a legal government research paper, and it's on my blog, moansar.blogspot.com. There's a recent article there which talks about the research on paedophilia, which within the UK we know is committed 95% by white British men. We know that there's a problem with Asian men who make up around, the ethnic minorities make up something like, I think, 13% of the UK population, that account for 7% of paedophilia. Within that 7%, 2% is with the Asian community. But recently we have these far-right, anti-Islam and Islamophobic parties and organisations who are making out that Muslims or Asians particularly have a particular disproportionate problem with paedophilia, where actually, when we analyse the statistics and the evidence scientifically, we see, well, actually, the Asian community per se, not of all of whom are Muslim, account for 2% of the problem, but account for somewhere in the region of 10% of the population, and 95% of the problem lives with a certain section of the population. I don't want to racialise it, because I know there's a tendency to do these things, but just for debunking some of these myths and providing some critical analysis on some of these things, as we see the modern perspective, I mean, remember, Richard II married, was it a 6-year-old? He married a 6-year-old? So Yeah, and the King of England. So and that's in England, and that's in Europe. That's in modern times or more modern times. Certainly, the laws around this and the statistics are clear. So, I would really want to pull away from any idea or any argument or any notion that paedophilia, for all of its ugliness, all of its heinousness, all of its deeply offensive nature, can be particularly placed with people of a certain religion or certain belief. Because
of course, there is a big difference though between. No, there is a big difference between. There's a big difference between people acting against the common law of the country and state-sanctioned sex with a 9-year-old. Are you talking about the Sharia saying that under Sharia law the age of consent in the UK is 16, but what would be the age of consent in Islamic countries throughout history? People as young as 9 have been married, and that marriage being consummated.
Shall I come into this? First of all, I ought to point out that I get, yes, modernist interpretations may be what they are, but we have 4 hadiths in Sahih al-Bukhari, which say that Aisha was 9 years old, 3 in Sahih Muslim, 3 in El-Sijistani, Abu Dawood. We also have At-Tabari, Ibn Hisham, Ibn Majah. So it's all across the board.
You have to remember all from one source.
No, different isnad.
No, different. You're mixing up. These are different collators of witness statements, but the witness is one person.
Okay, guys. The witness. No, he's right. He's right. Okay, let me just tell you what he's talking about. Right? He's talking about this. When you have a narrator narrating a hadith from a prophet, it's like, okay, this companion says this and so on and so forth, right? Usually what happens is one companion, like some companions hear from the prophet and they're narrated someone and then the person spreads it. Now, look, if you look at the chain of narration, right, you look at the connections, and then you see, is there a common connection with every single one of those chains? Like, so when you say there's 3 in Bukhari, or 5 in Bukhari and 3 in Muslim, is there a single narrator that's common in every single one of them? So for all the authentic narration, I mean, there are dozens and dozens of non-authentic narrations which are narrated in history books and stuff. So as far as an issue of belief, this is absolutely true that Aisha was married at 6 and the marriage consummated at 9. But it's true that in all the authentic narration, there's one particular narrator. His name is Hisham bin Urwa. So this guy and he narrated this on the authority of his father. Now, Muhammad, he brings up a very good point, which is very common on the internet. But you see, it's a very weak point as well, because they say, oh, he was 80 years old and when he narrated this, and he had a very weak memory. And some scholars do mention, like Imam Dahabi also mentioned that he had a weak memory, but they don't mention that these complaints about him occurred after he migrated to Iraq. The narration that he's talking about isn't at that point. He's 100% thiqa before a certain point of his time, before he got too old. Every scholar, every hadith scholar that there is says, yes, this narration is authentic. No one with any integrity can deny the authenticity of this narration. What the people online do is they look at other history books and they say, oh, well, this history book has this one narration out of like 17 which has a discrepancy, which has a certain difference of date of Aisha's sister. And since you know Aisha's sister, the difference between Aisha's sister and herself is like, I don't know, for some 5 or 6 years. Therefore, the hadith about Aisha in Bukhari cannot be true. Now, again, this has been thoroughly devastated by actual Muslim scholars. And the thing is, Muhammad comes off kind of like Sufi-ish leaning. Like, oh, we all live together, we're all happy, blah, blah, blah. Like, kumbaya and all this stuff, right? So it's silly, but okay, yeah, he wants to believe that, and I love Muhammad for being that way, right? Because we want more Muslims like him. But the thing is, even like if he is Sufi, like hypothetically, right? Sheikh Jibril Haddad, he's very, very prominent Sunni who he is Sufi leaning, or he's Sufi himself, or I don't know which tariqah he follows. But he himself has come up with a rock solid refutation of this criticism of Hisham bin Urwa. This is not true. But at the same time, Muhammad is right. Every single narration Sahih narration. There are lots of other narrations. Every single authentic, for the people who are listening, every single authentic narration in Bukhari and Muslim about Aisha's age, regarding her being married at 6 and consummated 9. Keep in mind that this is a lunar year. So if the marriage was consummated in 9 lunar years, exactly 9 lunar years, it's still 8 years and 7 or 8 months, right? So it's so every authentic narration in Bukhari, in the Sahihain at least, comes through Hisham bin Urwa, and he has criticism against him. But that's after he migrated to Iraq, and back then it wasn't called Iraq, but so you can continue on from there. So the arguments against Aisha's marriage are worthless, are actually really, really lame.
I thought also it's interesting, that theory as may be, and that's very interesting. Thank you for that clarification. In practical terms, in the traditional Islamic law, the Hanafis, Malikis, Shafis, Hanbalis all agreed that the minimum age of marriage for a girl was 9 years old. So I mean, there was other factors as well. She had to be classified by Islamic standards as being physically mature, which meant that she had to. It could be the excretion of sexual fluids or menstruation, or the development of pubic hair, and she had to exhibit some signs of psychological maturity, although there doesn't appear to have been any kind of general rule. I think it was just up to the individual scholars to decide. Is it possible that I could go back to some long previous point that was made?
Hold on, let me stop you right there, Kling. Stopspamming had a comment, and then of course when he has his comment, we'll have all had to turn, and then I'd like to go back to Muhammad, because of course there's a lot for him to respond to at this point.
Okay, just one tiny comment, right? So I'm assuming from Muhammad's previous comment, which is why I was specific about Bukhari and Muslim, that he doesn't believe that every single hadith in Bukhari and Muslim is authentic. So I'm just assuming that for now. If Muhammad, if I've misrepresented your position, please let me know, because I just wanted to know, like, yes or no, whether you believed every single hadith in Bukhari and Muslim is authentic. Apparently you seem to say no, because you reject the hadith about Aisha's age of marriage.
No, I would just let me make my comment, because this is exactly along the same lines.
Okay.
Because I maintain that we have gone off the board. We've gone, I don't know where, statistics and words and things we cannot verify at the moment. So why don't we talk about what we can do at the moment, and that is ascertain whether you, Muhammad, actually believe that the tafsir, that the hadiths are accurate, because it seems to me that you're saying is some are not. So you seem to be able to cherry pick which ones are true, which ones are not. So I think the question that Ali Abbas is asking is totally valid, because what you're saying, we have the Quran where we know there are inaccuracies, and that 90% of Islam is made up of the Sunnah. And the thing is, how much of the Sunnah is authentic and how much is not? And that is what would interest me as well, what your opinion is on that.
Okay, that's a fair question. For me, it seems like there's quite a hard line stance on this, which is coming from your questions, which is that either you have to be A or you have to be B, which is either you accept them or you don't accept them, or you accept that some of them are false and there may be some inaccuracies in some of them. I'm not quite sure that's probably the best intellectual approach to the issue. I think perhaps looking at the issue in terms of the way I would look at it is to say, well, actually, we have a series of witness statements. We need to verify whether all of the witness statements are accurate, who they're from, what is the source, what is the time and place, what is the context. Now, that in itself takes an awful long time, an awful lot of credible research. Somebody has to pore over the documents and the scriptures and the commentaries to find out how well these things link together and what is the chain of narration. Now, within that, those two, the rock and the hard place, which you eloquently lay out, I think there's a middle ground, which is that in Islam we have something called ikhtilaf. Now, ikhtilaf is a case of saying, well, there's allowable disagreement. So, for example, somebody might say that they saw you standing outside the pub at 10 o'clock. And somebody may say, well, they saw you stood outside the pub at 11 o'clock. And instead of having two disagreements about what time you stood outside the pub, those two people can come to the agreement saying, well, possibly we can agree to differ. because it may well be that he was outside the pub at 10 o'clock. It may well be he was also outside the pub at 11 o'clock. Just because A is correct, it does not necessarily mean that B is not correct, or that B is solely correct and A cannot be correct. So there is an area of difference in between, and I think when you look at a lot of the scholars' interpretation of hadiths, they won't directly say one is strictly incorrect. So, for example, the age of Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, when she was married to the Prophet, is an example. The scholars that say actually she was 9 when she was married, and here is the evidence. There are other scholars say that she was 19 when she is married, and here is the evidence. And they will say this is an issue of ikhtilaf. This is an issue of allowable disagreement within Islam, within the deen. So I'm not exactly sure we have to go to extremes in terms of saying it's either definitely 100% correct, or you have to accept that certain things have to be rejected.
Yeah, but hang on,
it is a bit unfortunate.
One at a time. Let's kick it to Stop Spamming. He hasn't had a lot of time this show.
The point that I'm trying to make is whether you're standing outside the pub at 10 or 11 o'clock is of very little relevance. But whether you believe the hadiths, yes or no, is going to affect you for eternity. So you need to be bloody well sure and 100% sure that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure about your view on that, but we'll agree to differ.
I must say, though, that I think that it's very unfortunate for the 9-year-old girl who lives in the area where they agree to differ. It's a big difference. A man outside at 10 or a man outside at pub 11 is a little bit different from a man in bed with his wife at the age of 9.
95% of paedophilia in the UK is committed by people who look like
it's
you.
not paedophilia. It's not paedophilia.
Talking about
Hang on.
State sanctioned sex. Hang on. Not talking about illegal activity. We're not talking about people who do it anyway. What we're talking about is state sanctioned actions.
Right, and you presumably have some evidence, not just rhetoric.
Are you claiming that at no point in history a person hasn't married and consummated a marriage with a 9-year-old wife in an Islamic-run country? Is that what you're claiming?
Asking the when did you stop being your wife question is a little bit too loaded even for me. So what I would suggest is this. Look, this is 2012. If we want to talk about the Islamic state of affairs today, not a possible hypothetical situation in a possible country under a possible administrative regime where possibly something happens, this is a bit weak, let's be honest. Let's talk very directly and very clearly and honestly about the state of affairs today. And in Britain, I'm a British citizen, born in Britain. My grandfather fought in the Second World War, so I mean, I'm hopefully pretty British. I have a British sense of humour, ish. And at the end of the day, I look at the situation in the country I live in, and I say, well, 95% of paedophilia committed in this country. So this is talking about, we have 62 rapes of children every day in this country, 122 rapes of adult women in this country. We're the teenage pregnancy capital of the world. We are the sex trafficking capital of the world in England. And to even suggest that there's a problem with sexualization of minors within Islam is ludicrous, considering the only place which has worse statistics than here is the United States, 2 of the most socially immobile countries on the planet. So let's look at sexualization as a proper issue in its proper context today. Let's look at the evidence that's available, and we look at the evidence and say, well, where does the problem lie? Does it lie with the Muslim community and their attitude to sex, or does it lie with the non-Muslim communities and their attitude to sex? I think we have to be authentic.
Before anyone else speaks, I'm going to say goodbye to our current caller, Ali. Thank you for joining. So long.
Nice talking to you guys. I hope to see you again sometime soon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Come back next show, by all means.
Great stuff.
Okay, now, in response to that, what Rationalizer was saying, he was not making an appeal to a hypothetical circumstance at a hypothetical point in time. He was pointing to documented historical periods during which this was considered in many parts of the Muslim world as because of Islam and how it was interpreted and what was written.
I'm happy to look at any evidence. If you wanted to provide some evidence a couple of days before the show and say, look at this, we'll talk about it, I would have been more than happy to do that.
Okay, but do you acknowledge that we're not talking about hypothetical things, and we're not talking about explicitly the United Kingdom in 2012, and your Britishness is not under under question or attack, I don't think. I'm just saying that for a long time there were policies like the marriage of very young children that continue in some areas today, sometimes with the will of the state, sometimes against the will of the state, in like rural Muslim places, or in Iran, for example, where it's still considered sanctioned by the religion. So we're not talking about hypotheticals.
Because
let him come back, Klingschor.
I'm more than happy to look at that on the basis that, look, the reason I bring my Britishness into it is because I know about the state of affairs in Britain today.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about Iran. I'm not talking about Pakistan. I'm not talking about India. I'm not talking about Somalia. I can talk to you relatively reasonably and with a degree of evidence and backing and understanding about the situation in Britain. And the situation I see in Britain is that regardless of whether anybody thinks it's state-sanctioned or allowed by an administration or otherwise, we see that 95%...
Please don't repeat the statistics for a third time. We know the statistics.
Well, it's being brought up, so I should be entitled to answer.
Yeah, but you have made the same point 3 times though. So make a different point. Don't keep giving us 95% statistics.
Well, if the question's raised 3 times, I'll answer it 3 times. Okay, and so we are. I think the question is: are we talking about a hypothetical issue? I think this is conjecture. Nobody's brought me any evidence that we can have a look at. Nobody's brought me specific state of circumstances. And actually, as a relatively rational person, I think, let's talk about specifics. Let's talk about evidence. And so my recent article, my recent blog, my answer to Baroness Varsi's comments in the Evening Standard in London were very, very clear, and I made it very, very clear, which is that if 98% potentially of paedophilia in Britain is committed by non-Muslims, focusing on Muslims as being the cause of the problem is a bit spurious at best.
I don't believe anyone made that point, actually. What I was saying is this all-powerful, all-knowing entity has laid down the foundation until the end of time for what is legal and what is not legal. A lot of people seem to believe that this includes having sex with 9-year-old females, whereas you don't believe that it includes sex with 9-year-old females. It seems pretty unfortunate for those the 9-year-old females that have experiences, because they live in an area where the men believe it.
Which 9-year-old females are you talking about? Who? Can you give me a name?
You.
Mohammed, I'm gonna have to blow the whistle and give you a 10-yard penalty. I really think that you're playing dumb at this point. Look, these hadith exist, and the majority of at least the Sunnah Muslims, the majority sect, held very high stock in these hadith. Of course, the Shia have their own collections that have very similar guidelines, but they have different chains of narrators based on who trusted whom. So for a long time, in a wide swath of the world, whether it was a misunderstanding or not, this was seen as the religion, condoning this behavior. Now, if you're going to say that, these hadiths are in doubt, or whatever the source of these provisions are in doubt, that's perfectly acceptable. I don't say that just because a hadith is sahih means it's necessarily true. But so that's reasonable in itself. But let's not pretend that in the name of Islam, this practice of marrying these very young girls and copulating with them has been in place for a very long time. I mean, we shouldn't have to come up with specific, dig up the grave of some little girl who died in childbirth because she was pregnant too young or anything of that sort. I mean, but I think that the point that Rash was trying to make was that if this is wrong, if in fact this was not the will of Allah, if this was not what Muhammad or the angel Gabriel by extension was trying to convey, a lot of people have suffered because of this misunderstanding.
Now, I just want to clarify something here.
Yeah.
First of all, statistics.
But all right, so you can. It seems like a very, for a group of rationalists, it seems like a very odd area of discussion. But I mean, it's your show. It's you're welcome to take the discussion where you seem, but it seems a very odd area of discussion for people who are very rational.
I actually want to get back to the science, but I just want to clarify this. What you're talking about is illegal activity within, like, Britain, USA, whatever. I want to note, by the way, that in developing, quote unquote, developing countries, it's very hard to obtain statistics. People just don't report crimes, particularly not to the police. So this is probably what accounts for apparently higher crime rates in more developed and secure countries with better infrastructure. But I mean, what we're talking about here is we're talking about in Iran, minimum age of marriage for girls is 9. You know, in Saudi Arabia, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, we've got less than, like, age of consent, less than 12.
And in Spain it's 13. And in Spain it's 13.
Yeah, which is also bad. But, like, do you see what I mean? In these countries,
I'm absolutely lost as to what the point is here.
Well, the point is that this is the practical application here. This is what we're talking about when we say it matters. It's not just a man standing outside the pub. It's that in traditional Islamic law, and I can give you the academic sources if you want. I can link you to the blog where I've got them all quoted.
What I'm saying is it seems such a dry, boring error, and I'll tell you why. Because there is no place where Islamic law is being implemented in its proper form right now, anywhere on the planet. We don't have any Islamic states, we don't have any Islamic countries, and anywhere where Sharia should be implemented or wants to be implemented, it's subject to the law of the country. So the question we're having here, the only question I see relevant is, right now, here, at this point in time, dealing with the problems of society today, the problem of paedophilia and the problem of underage sex goes on predominantly within non-Muslim communities, disproportionately so.
How can you make that claim? We don't have statistics from Muslim countries.
No, we do. No, absolutely. I'm talking about in Britain, at this point in time, it's the 2nd of June, 2012, today, the problem of underage sex is disproportionately a problem with the non-Muslim white community within the UK. That's a statistical
even then, I mean, we would expect to have less statistics.
Outside of this, I'm not sure that this is that interesting a debate. We're talking. What you seem to be trying to do is to say there is a hypothetical problem based on conjecture without any evidence against a possibility in some historical reality. And I'm saying
no. Mohammed, please let Klingschor make his full point before you come back.
No, look, okay, this is it. Aisha, Muhammad, had sex with Aisha bint Abu Bakr when she was 9 years old, according to a plethora of hadiths. This was taken to be authentic by traditional Islamic law. This is in the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali, they all agree that the minimum age for marriage for girls is 9 years old. And then we have in countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, you can marry 9-year-old girls. Okay?
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with the premise of what you're saying.
Well, I mean, that will... Okay,
we'll have to agree to differ, because viewers tuned in to see us both saying, I don't agree. Yeah. That really ain't that interesting, let's be honest.
Allow me to kill this. I agree that a roundabout deadlock in this matter isn't interesting. It seemed almost at one point of you saying that the debate, the point we were making earlier wasn't interesting. Look, what I think they were trying to impress upon you was that the man outside the pub argument, or that model, it might work to illustrate how the information is conveyed and how sometimes a compromise or a decision must be struck. But it doesn't, this metaphor doesn't work on the level that the man outside the pub just doesn't carry the far-reaching consequences. You know, I mean, imagine that somehow the difference between a man standing at a pub at 8 and at 9, you know, 1 billion people lived or died based on that over a period of 1,400 years. You know, I mean, it had these far-reaching implications. You know, so you know, we don't have much of a choice. You know, we're bound by the fact that for over 1,000 years, people have been making very important decisions based on these hadiths and other writings. That's all we're trying to impress, is just the importance of it. You know.
Okay. Would anyone object if I turn the topic back to science and Islam? Because
sure.
just before you...
Unfortunately, I'm on tight time, so I've only got 5 minutes left, so anything you can squeeze, by all means, squeeze it in now, if that's okay.
Okay, fantastic.
Before you go on, though, Klingschor, you're not going to do Islam didn't invent science argument, are you?
Sorry.
No, I just want to question some of the... where was I? Okay. Because I've been reading a blog as well. You said on your blog, if I can find, here we go, that the contributions to Islam and here's the influence that Islam has had. Could you clarify what you mean here? In what way did Islam lead to the scientific method and Renaissance? Could you be more specific? Because it's a bit confusing for me at this point in time.
Okay. I think one of the important things to look at is what we in the West are taught about these kind of things. In the West, since the Treaty of Westphalia, from the Treaty of Augsburg, since the Reconquista, and since the time when Muslims had been effectively pushed out of Europe, and the royal families of Europe had agreed that Europe would become essentially a Christian club, and you could choose any faith you like as long as it was Catholicism or Protestantism, which obviously is difficult for you guys, difficult also for me, and of course if you're a Jew in Europe at the time. This set the framework, and since then, Western education has lent itself to an Aristotelian model of classicism, but has actually refused a lot of the very important, I would say, a far more realistic legacy from Islam and Muslim scholars. So, for example, we had sorry, people that were Skyping, but we have a number of Muslim scholars and I have to say as well, non-Muslim scholars who helped pioneer a number of scientific, rationalistic, and philosophical areas within the West. We had people like Al-Razi, Ibn al-Haytham, Ibn Haben, Ibn Taymiyyah, who refuted Aristotelian logic and showed that induction was the only reliable form of inference. We had al-Biruni, we had al-Khindi, even I think the Western academic is Briffault, who wrote a book called The Making of Humanity, and this was like in the early 1900s, who essentially said that the debt that the West had to the Muslims and to the Arabs was not just like discoveries and not just theories, it was its entire existence. So we have Western academics. If you look at people like Newton, he was part of a whole movement in the West of British, Western, European scientists who accepted that they were stood on the shoulder of giants, and Muslim scholars. They read greatly into Islam. They rejected what I'd call mainstream Christian ideology. They were non-Trinitarian. They were Unitarian. They rejected a lot of what I'd call fundamentalist Christian ideology and came to a far closer Islamic understanding as people of Christian faith, which were far more aligned. I mean, we had astronomy and mathematics from Greek civilizations, in Hellenistic Alexandria. We have the Greek temperament. We have that whole emphasis and attitude to philosophy, which actually was refined and pioneered and channeled in a way that in the year 1000, in the year 1100, at the time of the Crusades, Europeans were butting up against this resurgent revivalist, or well, a newborn actually at that time, Islam, which was talking about humanism, which was giving a humanist bend to the Western mind, saying that outside of the prevailing Catholic Church, it wasn't just darkness and barbarism, it was actually, there was wealth, there was knowledge. All of these, the rationalistic ideas from the Crusades that spread into Muslim Spain, Sicily. The funny thing is, the irony is in the West we call it the Dark Ages, but this is a time where Christendom borrowed and assimilated Islamic ideological culture. We have things like the works of Al-Ghazali, Al-Farabi.
But okay, I think we get the idea, sir. But,
all right.
Okay.
So first of all, which Islam? I mean, the Abbasids, enforced Mu'tazila Islam with an iron fist. The Ismailis of, the Fatimids of Egypt, under whom science flourished as well, they practiced Ismaili Islam, completely different. it's which. I mean, what do you mean Islam? You're referring to Islam like it's a geographical location or a civilization. It's a religion.
Muslims don't see it like that. You see, Muslims see Islam as being a complete way of life. A deen comes from the Arabic word dana, and dana means the kind of process a judge would go through in weighing up the harms and benefits and pros and cons.
I get it. It's an all-encompassing life system, for all different aspects of your life. I understand that.
We'll just call it a way of life. That's how Muslims see it, as a way of life. So if you want to try and pluck at areas and say, well, there's a division here and other issues there, I mean, you're welcome to take the view. But I'm a Muslim. I have a pretty, I think, reasonable view of Islam, and Islam is. It is what it is. It has lots of different threads. It has a rich tapestry belief. It has lots of different kind of traditions and ways of thought and different schools of thought within Islam. But we are talking about the Muslims, the scholars, the imams, the Islam. All these people are part of this broad context, this broad tapestry of Islam, this colourful tapestry of Islam. That pioneered thought and philosophy and science and art and led to the Renaissance.
But was the religion really the source? So this is what I get down. It's not that this civilization didn't produce anything, but when you say that Islam produced these things, it's a little bit like, for example, some of the Umayyad caliphs were famous drinkers. And if I was back at the court of, one of the Umayyad, they said they had one caliph who would swim in a pool of wine and drink so much as he swam in it that the level would go down significantly. And I thought, in this court, where there's so much wine, there had to be some really great wine to be served, maybe by someone who professed Islam. But would you say that Islam gave us wonderful alcoholic beverages? You know what I mean?
A more appropriate comparison.
Hold on. Rationalizer has a quick point, then we'll go back to Muhammad.
A more appropriate comparison would have been the Hellenistic era with the Greeks. Now, these people really came up with some great stuff. You had not only discovery that the Earth was a sphere, but Eratosthenes practically worked out within a very accurate degree how big the Earth was. There was a lot of scientific discovery for many, many centuries. If people wanted to ask a biology question, the first thing they will say is, what did Galen say? And they would look to Galen's medical books. Now, and they really discovered some absolutely brilliant stuff. Would that mean, therefore, that their belief in Zeus and Thor was paramount in them making these discoveries, and therefore there is some kind of credible claim in the existence of a man that throws lightning bolts?
Right. So, I mean, that's the two halves of it. I mean, what he and I are both driving at is, was the religion truly the sources?
Let me answer the first point first,
okay.
Then the second point second, and then your third point third, if that's fair, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
The first point, any story that recounts a man swimming in wine and drinking so much that the level of the pool drops, I think you have to take a pinch of salt with, if not chuck it out altogether. I think secondly, you have to remember that the traditions of ancient Greek philosophy and science was pretty much entirely lost to the West if it wasn't for the Muslims. And there isn't any disagreement amongst the scholars.
Not quite.
Okay, let him. There were a couple of things. Let him respond to all of it.
There isn't any disagreement that I've come across amongst either Eastern, Islamic, or Western scholars and philosophers who are on the fact that actually, if it wasn't for the Muslims who had kept the learning of Greek and Latin alive and had kept these were essentially lost scriptures to the West alive at the time. Now, does that mean Muslims can take credit for that? Absolutely not. But what Muslims can take credit for, and it's a really, really, probably a vitally important question you raise, which as someone's put to me before, which is, isn't it the case that it just so happened these people were Muslim who made these pioneering developments, but it wasn't anything to do with Islam?
Yeah.
And that is a really great, rational question.
Thank you.
And the answer is, well, actually, Islam promotes knowledge. Islam promotes understanding. Islam promotes ilm, which is knowledge. And so the most important heart of Islam is about learning, is about developing knowledge, is about transmitting knowledge, and the pursuit of knowledge. And everywhere within the Quran, Islam is described as a religion for people who think. So if you think, and not just think in terms of way of saying, well, actually, I believe myself to be a more intellectual entity than you because I think and you worship a fairy in the sky, and because I'm rationalistic and I studied science and evolution and I've read Dawkins inside out and back to front and upside down, therefore I'm intellectually superior to you. Not that kind of thinking. The kind of thinking that is broad, encompasses all of human history, as well as science. Islam is not against science. In fact, it pioneered science in the West. Islam is not against critical thought. It's very much in favor of Western thought. I mean, Occam's razor, issues and real pillars of Western philosophical thought and civilization, all of these things were pioneered by Muslims. So the question is, was Islam responsible for those things? I would say certainly yes. Many of these people were imams. Many of these people were scholars. Many of these people were also hifz al-Quran, hafiz. They had memorized the Quran. So when Ibn al-Haytham expounds the method of using inductive reasoning and develops and essentially pioneers, you could say he single-handedly pioneered the scientific method as we use it today. This very much comes from the Islamic world and is actually against the Hellenistic approach, which doesn't talk about using inductive methods for the scientific.
I gotta flatly contra. I mean, the pre-Socratic atomists. I won't even give them credit for pioneering it, but they certainly were, of the same mind as Ibn Haytham. Ibn Haytham wrote what was at the time considered a definitive treatise on the subject. But if you might be taking too much Plato and basically too much Plato and Socrates as being representative of all Hellenics. So I would say that the Greeks did have very similar. Some Greeks, not all Greeks. But some of the, people like Democritus, or if I have the name right, and several others, they had empiricism, and you had Greeks who had Greek atheists. You had Greeks who disdained of belief in miracles or chimeric creatures and things like that. But even then, I don't think that they're necessarily the first. They just are the first on record.
Yeah, you have to remember that we have academics like Sartre, and we have academics like Hammond, we have other academics like Sorokin who looked at how Europeans were trying to rationalize, enlightened Europeans, the gap between Aristotelian ideas of idealistic rationalism and the Islamic ideas from Ibn Rushd, Ibn Haytham, and even including the works of Maimonides, who nobody's claiming his work, trying to close the gap on some of these things, and essentially this was Christian theology trying to stick a flag in this stuff and say, well, we're going to claim this for ourselves, even though they'd essentially shut the door on science. And I think it was the teachings of up until the 15th century. You have to remember that philosophy and science were essentially considered antagonistic to religion by Christianity, and so Aristotelianism, Averroism. Bruno was burned, Kepler was persecuted, Galileo, we know about him. And so actually it was the Muslims who pierced that skin. It was the Muslims who pierced that protective shield and said, actually, no, you can't have a renaissance until Europe can move forward with some sort of unfettered development, and you can't move forward until you have somebody like a Western Renaissance. Fair enough, it decided, thanks very much Muslims, thanks very much Islam, but to protect our view of the world, protect our worldview, we have to install Aristotle on the throne of philosophy and refuse and reject the Islamic contribution to the West. And unfortunately, 600 years later, we're still suffering the consequences of that stuff, because young kids are growing up saying, well, I don't understand the contribution of Islam to the West. I don't understand the contribution of Muslims in Islam to Western philosophy and Western thought. And actually, for somebody who's quite a rationalist, quite a scientific background, I studied physics to quite some standard. It's a real shame that kids are brought up in the West not understanding that actually the fruits that they enjoy come from a tree which has got Islamic roots. I'm really sorry.
No.
Yeah,
I'm going to speak to you now. I'm sorry.
On the subject of science, I'm really glad that you're an avid fan of science. And earlier you said that anything that doesn't meet the scientific process you throw out. Now, I'm sure that you'll know that one of the things...
I really have to go now, guys. Rationalizer, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but have me on again sometime, but it's very late in the UK and I have a family to look after, so
Okay.
I can hear movements upstairs, my family waiting to come down, so you have to forgive me. Have me on again sometime, I'll be more than happy.
Okay, well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to say, Ansar's on a postcard. What a brilliant name for a blog. That's just fabulous.
Trust only for the black country to get it is all I can say, but anyway. All right.
So long, take care.
Thanks, have a good night, bye.
Bye.
No.
Okay, well, obviously we're going to... Our momentum is going to take us across the territory that he covered, but as always, now that he's not here to defend himself, let's be, courteous and so forth in how we treat this material. Man, was that guy full of shit! I couldn't believe. No.
Oh man, it annoys me. It annoys me so much. This delusion that Muslims maintain that Islam is one, and that it's like this big nebulous generalization.
No, let's not climb down this thing. We all know this. We know where we are. Let's just drop. I think we should drop it right here and go to the next point, and that is it.
I don't think so. That was just such a huge cornucopia of stuff to respond to. I don't.
Well, you can only laugh about it. Why spend time on this?
I think for the sake of the viewers,
someone is wrong on the internet.
No, this is so childish. Come on. I mean, why waste time on this?
Well, you sound like him. It's like, oh, well, who cares when little girls can get married? It's no different than... Yeah, well... No, I'm sorry. I'll try not to make it...
People are definitely being stoned for adultery in the world. I was curious of what his stance on of stoning people to death for adultery was. I suspect he'd have said that he disagreed with it because he has the kind of view of Islam that I would like to have if I were a Muslim. It's the kind of view that I would have made up for myself. So I don't know his stance, obviously. I'd suspect that he doesn't agree with stoning adulterers, but obviously this does happen. So either people are guilty of not stoning adulterers, or people are guilty of murdering people because they shouldn't stone adulterers. Yeah. And it's a pretty significant thing for, if you look at UK law, it's pretty clear whether or not you should stone adulterers to death. And I'd have just thought, the all-knowing, all-powerful entity would have done a better job than UK law.
All right, I just want to say this, and then I'll be gone, because I just had a request to respond to Ansar's things on science. So I'll very, very summarily, I'll just say, to reassure the audience, there was no science under the Umayyads, and no Muslim contribution to science. It only happened under the Abbasids. There was secular origins, El-Mansur's Persiophilia, and admin-driven translations. The pioneers were not the Muslims. The pioneers were mostly the Greeks, by definition, or the Babylonians. Pioneer means the people who whereas what we have under the Muslims is a refinement for the most part, which was fantastic. And some pioneering, but not to the extent that he said. I mean, Galen was always the authority in Muslim science, for medicine, for example. If you wanted to refute someone, you just cited Galen, and you couldn't trump Galen, for example. And that's a fact. Also, it all had pre-Islamic basis. I mean, do you know how Muslims describe science in the Middle Ages? They call it al-ulum al-qadima, which means ancient knowledge, as opposed to al-ulum ad-din, which is the religious science, which is hadiths and Quran and so forth. Like even then, they delineated between science and religion. They made separation. Then you had all the non-Muslims involved, and what was he saying about how, oh yes, in Islam, the clerics didn't... I mean, Al-Ghazali was very hostile to science. I mean, Ibn Rushd was stoned and attacked for his heretical views, which were very much influenced by science.
I mean, as a heretic?
He wasn't killed. No, he wasn't killed. He was attacked. And people threw stones at him. They stoned him.
Oh, just lynched.
But he didn't... Yeah, lynched, sorry. He was lynched. I mean, many scholars were killed and lynched. And ex post facto declared to be apostates. So, I mean, it's just, whereas, and also, I mean, Well, I mean, Greek knowledge wasn't. I mean, yes, a huge quantity of Greek science was gained by. What does he mean? Islamic roots. The roots are Babylonian and Greek and Egyptian. Yeah. Islam is in the fucking trunk of the tree.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, the Carolinian, whatever you pronounce it, I'm tired. Renaissance. We had, all these revival of Greek texts. They weren't getting it from the Muslims. They had these preserved in monasteries and so forth. So it's just, I don't know. Anyway.
Well, yeah, you're thinking about the trunk of the tree as opposed to the roots. There's listening to Muslim apologists talk about the role Islam played. It's like a relay race with 3 members, and the person in the middle takes all the credit. And the thing is, they were.
And that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Why are they trying to take? I mean, it was. Look, the golden age of Arabic literature and science, Arabic language, Arabic being the lingua franca that they all spoke, was fantastic. I think it was an absolutely marvelous period. It's one of my favorite periods of history. But to say that it was special, that just it's easy to see where it began, how it developed, and how it stagnated and came to an end. And it had nothing to do. It had very little to do with Islam as a religion, and it wasn't special. Like, they didn't have science. Okay, that's false. They did not have science as we know it. Science as a definition, they didn't have it. What they had was awesome, but what they had wasn't technically science as we understand today. They didn't have coherent theories with predictive capabilities and so forth. They didn't have this. They collect.
So that is the point that I was just about to make to him before he went. He's familiar with science. Earlier on in the conversation, he said, I'm familiar with the scientific process. Anything that doesn't meet the scientific process, I throw out. Now, I'm sure that most people know that the thing that gives scientific theories their confidence is predictive models. And the more that this scientific theory can predict and is then verified to be true, the more confidence we have that this scientific model is accurate. And what I wanted to know is, based on the scientific method, what predictive models has he formed? I was really interested in that because, I really wanted to hear some predictive models. I wanted to know what they predicted. I wanted to know what we're going to discover in the future based on these predictive models so that they could actually be objectively evaluated. But unfortunately, I didn't get time to ask him.
And I was going to ask him, how come if all the Muslims are so pro-science, what happens if it suddenly differentiates or is different from what you find in the Quran? How can you suddenly have a split moon or a mountain that does cause earthquakes?
That's easy.
Why are we always talking about science in religion?
As soon as it agrees, they call it evolutionism.
I also heard that, and I thought, how can he be so pro-science and then suddenly he calls it evolutionism or evolutionists or something?
Did he? Well, we missed.
At the very beginning, he said it. At the very beginning, he mentioned evolutionism.
Well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fantastic that he's so progressive. Like, he's one of the most progressive Muslims I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
By the way he's described it, I think that's fantastic. But it's just when it comes down to fact claims like Islam created science.
Yeah.
That's where we have an issue, because it's a fact claim and it's an incorrect fact claim.
And then try to disengage with, why are we talking about this? You brought it up, right? Anyway, whenever I do the show, I scribble notes so that I don't. I scribble down the list.
Yeah, same.
I scribble. You have to leave?
No, same. I scribble down lists I keep notes.
I could have sworn you said peace out, like you suddenly had to leave.
I would
my ears been checking. Sorry. Anyway, I scribble notes so I don't forget a topic and make sure to go back in the list of guests so I don't forget that we have people waiting to call in. And when he was talking about Islam promotes knowledge, I wrote down Islam promotes knowledge. And then I thought about it and I put in parentheses, not very effectively, grant you, but...
Citation needed.
It's ilm. It's I think really when they say knowledge, it's religious knowledge. It's knowledge of God.
Yeah,
seek knowledge even in China, but I think it's ilm, which is not, it's not saying discover, and when the Quran says think, what the Quran is doing is giving a freaking argument from design. It's saying, look at the trees. There must be a God. Think about it.
Why do the birds fly?
And also, no compulsion in religion goes on to say the truth has been made clear. It's like, look, there's no compulsion in religion. The real religion's obvious.
Gunderson, thank you for joining us. You can talk. I mean, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to get you on before our guest was on. I don't know if you wanted to ask him something particular or get feedback from him.
Oh no, I wasn't watching it.
Was it too painful? I'm just kidding.
There's too much lag with Blog TV. But with you've been talking about like what Islam has in common with other religions, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can talk about whatever.
Okay, well,
yeah.
Well,
can I just make one quick interjection?
Well, let him get his question out. Let him get his question.
Sorry.
No. Go on, Klingschor.
Oh no, I just wanted to say, you know how he's saying inductive reasoning? This is from Greek thinkers, the history of ancient philosophy. Two things may be ascribed to Socrates, so we are informed by his intellectual grandchild, Aristotle, inductive reasoning.
Yeah.
And the fixing of general...
I believe that was the one point where I just couldn't... I had to stop and interject. The idea that... I mean, Ibn Haytham's work on induction and the scientific method is, way ahead of its time.
It was on the
not
fringes
even
as well.
close to being the first.
It was... Listen to this, right? The systematic use of controlled experiments was on the periphery of the larger Muslim intellectual community and never put downwards. It was never, this is from Tenor Edist here. It was minor. It was like on the fringes. I mean, they didn't even adopt the decimal point. Even when El-Khwarizmi, or whatever his name is, invented algebra and invented the decimal point, Muslims continued to use the Babylonian, was it sexagesimal or something? The old number system. So, anyway. Sorry, Gunderson, you wanted to make a point.
He's passed from kidney. What was your question?
Yes. Basically, with this topic, with Islam in relation to Christianity and Judaism, in my studies of Islam in the past, I made a couple of observations that it seems to borrow more from Christianity in terms of dogma and, doctrine, and more from Judaism in terms of, laws and regulations. Is that a fair assessment?
No, I'm not sure I follow you entirely.
No, it's a little hard to explain because, it has a lot of Islam has a lot of concepts that aren't present in Judaism, which come from Christianity, like hell and Satan, Judgment Day. These are concepts absent from Judaism, or at least very ambiguous at best.
Yeah, Islam. Okay, we're all operating here under the assumption that there weren't gods and angels involved. So, in terms of putting on our Orientalist caps and looking at it strictly from a secular, scholarly perspective, Islam drew heavily on Judaism, Christianity, and other religions in the vicinity. And in my opinion, it took some of the worst parts of Judaism and Christianity, like it had put them both into a centrifuge each, and separated out the parts that I would find most objectionable. You have some of the exceptionalism and state militancy with one correspondence with the religion and the state. That you see in Judaism with the book of Joshua, for example, and then you have, of course, it's like Muhammad was tasting Judaism and he's saying, there's something missing. Oh yeah, eternal damnation. Get a good, sprinkling of that into this soup that I'm mixing. But that made, I don't know if that.
I agree. Yeah, it's a lot of the rules and regulations came from Judaism, and then there's the more advanced concepts of eternal damnation. Basically what he's done is he's taken all of the popular things of the time there's the Jews of the time with their strict rules and regulations, and then there's the stuff from Christianity about going to hell to be punished for eternity. And these are ideas not successful because they're popular, but just happen to be successful with human intuition and our psyches and so on. And he's taken all of the things which compel people to believe in something, mixed them all together, said, yes, jinns are real as well, and then said, and if you don't believe that I'm a messenger of this God, then you will be the person burning in hell. I mean, as I read things about Muhammad, he comes across as someone who's a bit obsessive compulsive, doing lots of, just about everything's a ritual. But yeah, I agree. A lot of it, I think, was taken from Judaism, and the threats of hell, which helped it be successful, were taken from Christianity. It was a reversion slightly back to Judaism. For example, they can't eat pigs, whereas Christians know that Jesus died so that Christians could eat pork sandwiches.
Even hell, I would say that the hell was probably taken from Judaism. Because Judaism actually adopted hell.
Not all of them, obviously.
Really?
I'm sure that there was some sect that did.
Well, I mean, I remember being taught in... I can't remember, it was last year now. So at uni, some class to do with monotheism and Abrahamic religions. And the professor who's Jewish is talking about rabbinical Judaism. Not Old Testament temple Judaism, but rabbinical Judaism, which is what we call Judaism today. And they do have an afterlife in that. They do have... They introduced... Because now the temple was gone, that was redundant, they had to... I don't know, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it made sense for them to adopt an afterlife, and they adopted afterlife.
Yeah, but... It's
afterlife, I thought it was resurrection. They believed that you would be judged.
Sorry, heaven.
And the earth would be recreated, and you'd be given resurrection bodies, and you would lead a physical existence, and the good people would be rewarded by being allowed to live forever in this place. I don't remember anything about people who don't deserve a reward living forever in a spiritual realm and being punished or anything.
I thought how it worked was that the bad people go to a place in Hebrew called Sheol.
Yeah.
Well, I understood Sheol to be comparable to some of the less punishing. To be comparable to some of the less punishing places in the Greek afterlife. That is, it's just a sort of solemn, quiet, sleepy, outpost of dead people. I mean, maybe there was some backwash. I mean, maybe a sect of Judaism that eventually sprouted Christianity and then the middle ground died off, or perhaps Christianity backwashed into Judaism in such a way that some of the newer doctrines stuck, but the doctrine of Jesus' divinity or what have you didn't stick. Who knows? Certainly today, it doesn't seem that any modern Jews believe in at least an afterlife. They seem to believe that a soul goes on to someplace, but they don't have any afterlife beliefs comparable to Christianity or Islam that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I was going to say that I don't think that even if some Jews at the time did adopt the doctrine of hell, that it doesn't. I can't really see how it would have ever become like a popular belief within Judaism.
Yeah,
I know that there was a reason for it, and it made a lot of sense. It was like I can't remember. It was a year ago, literally a year ago. But it made logical sense. But I only have anecdotes, so I guess I can't really go into this further unless I do research.
You were taught lies. In many ways, this episode was we visited a lot of the same ground that we did with Ibrahim Sayed, and with both of them. I mean, Muhammad Ansar, like I said, he makes Dr. Sayed look incredibly conservative by contrast. If either of these men were to sit down and write a scripture from their conscience, I still don't adhere to the idea of scripture. I still think that scriptures are a bad idea unless they actually are from a source as powerful and wise as they claim to be, which I don't think they are. But at least I think 9/10 of my objections and issues and problems with this religion would vanish if they just wrote a book that was based on their own conscience and didn't, try to do these contortions to try to make Islam something that it isn't. If I lived in a house and Ibrahim Syed was living to the left of me and Mohammed Ansar was living to my right, I would have no concerns whatsoever unless one of their kids joined a really radical sect. Who knows? But I mean, they're nice enough people, but I'll try to be nice. I don't think either of them have a leg to stand on. They act like you bring forth some hadith on any subject. It's like you're splashing a vampire with holy water.
Okay, but now ask yourself how this is possible.
I think it's because people are taught that their religion, at an age where they're not really able to get acquainted with it, their religion is what is good. If you want to be good, you need to have as much of this as you can. Then in the time... But look at the next step, because that is the first step, yes, but the next step is they have to realize at some point that it doesn't make sense. And then once they've realized that, then they start picking and choosing, and that's when you come to the real issue, what we have today, and that is that people don't really have scripture which is valid today. Then they realize that they have the commandments which are not relevant today, and that's when they need to come up with their own, and then you have exactly what you are saying. You have a different version. It's their own version, which is
not always about... It's not always about picking and choosing, though, is it? Because Muhammad was saying that he doesn't really have the time to do as much research as he would like to do. I got the impression that he doesn't scour through a hadith, as a scholar of some kind. Now, if you're only looking for certain issues, for example, he didn't like the sound of 9-year-old wives. So rather than going and reading lots of hadiths about Aisha's age and so on, because you don't want it to be true, if you go to the internet, for example, or any other source, and look for people's arguments that it isn't true, and then only look at the material that they present as their evidence, you haven't got time to look at everything. You've just looked at the evidence which tells you what you wanted to know in the first place. And exactly. I think that's an easy way of getting to the Islam that you want to be true without having to ignore everything else that you don't like.
Yeah, that's how most ideologies tend to work.
Exactly, yeah.
Like secular or not.
Yeah. The thing is, he covered so much ground in such a short amount of time, or maybe a long amount of time. And although he didn't answer a lot of the questions to my satisfaction, he did cover a lot of points, and I think I disagree with at least 9/10 of what he actually said. So I have a list of things, a huge backlog. One of the things, just out of
just before you go to the next bit, you said you disagree with 9/10. Now, are you sure it's 9/10 and not 95%?
Rough numbers. Rough numbers. Like that. I don't use the decimal point. It hasn't been adopted from the.
No, because did you know that 95% of paedophilia acts in the UK are committed by non-Muslim white men? Did you know that? I've heard that. I don't know where that statistic came from. I seem to have it in my head. It's come from somewhere,
Yeah. Did you know that 95% of the rapes are caused by 95% of the population? Yeah.
You know what as well I noticed is that like 2% of attacks come from Muslim men who present 20% of the population. Now, it's funny how the estimated population of Muslims in the UK changes depending on what argument is being made. It's like, but when it's only 2% committing crime, there's 20% of us are Muslims. But when Muslims aren't trying to take over the UK, they're only 5% of the population.
Yeah, I mean,
there a 99% chance that you need to check on your washing.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I usually just avoid those kinds of statistics altogether, because when you deal with modern statistics,
yeah, exactly.
it makes arguing about the hadith look like an easy path compared, because everybody makes up crap. They just make up crap, and then I, like a fool, go and actually look for an actual report, and they say, oh, well, that newspaper is a rag. You can't trust anything. And I'm, I can't take a copy of, some report published by a human rights organization and say, look, a group of Muslim scholars throughout the ages have said that this is a Sahih source, and it's got to, it's very difficult in a world so rife with conspiracy theorists and such that, I don't argue from modern sources. It's pointless. But anyway,
although what was he? I don't understand. He was trying to extrapolate that because in the UK, right, only 2% of according to only 2% of Muslims or whatever are pedophiles. Therefore, it's not a problem in the Muslim world in general.
Exactly.
What? Where does that follow? Like, it was just so incoherently stupid. But
that's the other thing is, to the extent that people who move from anywhere to, let's just say, the United Kingdom, it doesn't seem that any credit is given to English society, or I'm sorry, I know the United Kingdom extends more than England, but UK society is given no credit for any good behavior on the part of the population, which is at least to some degree being assimilated and influenced. The very same people. If you bring a kid here, if you're born in just Egypt and you come to the United Kingdom and your kids grow up to be valedictorian of their school, you don't know they could have lived very, very different lives if they'd stayed on the other side of the Mediterranean. But English society and Western society as a whole it doesn't get any credit. I know I keep slurring, United Kingdom and England specifically. Sorry about that. I know it's wrong. I just make that mistake casually. But yeah, there's no credit given to the institutions of the nations to which these immigrants are coming, and how the same stock of people will behave differently in different environments because of the impact those environments have. If you send a bunch of British orphans off to Yemen or wherever, they would grow up surrounded by that culture, and they would probably commit offenses or be part of the successes or failures of that society in proportion to their numbers in the population. But they would essentially, unless they have very strong ties to their home country and the culture from which they're coming, it's really more representative of what society is like and what values are in place at the place where they're moving to. Because the way he like I said, I don't want to talk too much about him specifically as a person. Now that he's gone, he can't defend himself. But of all the things that he dodged, the way that he said, okay, I will only defend this time and place and this particular statistic that I've gleaned, even if this statistic was true, it's just a very disingenuous tactic to say that centuries and centuries of child. When I had one of our first guests, on one of our first shows, we talked about slavery, and this guest was saying, well, slavery is not part of Islam. Islam abolishes slavery because Islam is everything that I think is good. And we said, no, look, if Islam was trying to, he backtracked. It's like, okay, there was slavery in Muslim civilization, but they were trying to get, Islam was going to get rid of it, and in most countries, Muslim countries today, slavery is not legal. And I said, well, look, mate, all the way up to the Ottoman Empire, there was legal slavery, so that was a very slow phasing out. But our guest today, he just wanted to defend one place and one time. The rest of all of the miscarriages of obedience to Muslim doctrine, he didn't want to acknowledge the existence of it.
Yeah, gambling was spaced out a lot quicker, though, wasn't it? He managed to get rid of gambling really quickly, and I'm not sure about this, but isn't chess outlawed or something, and various other games of chance were outlawed very quickly, but slavery was just a bit more complicated because obviously there were a lot of economic issues. You can't just free all those slaves because they're going to need houses and dinner and stuff. It's going to take a while.
Yeah, and I mean, as if any given Muslim society would take into account what might happen a few centuries in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Gunderson, I'm going to let you go, and we're going to keep complaining about stuff. Thank you for joining us. If anyone else would like to join us, we won't be on that much longer. We're going to be on things up pretty soon. But if anyone would like to join us in the last minute, send a Skype contact request or comment to the Gin and Tonic Show on Skype. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I disagreed with so much of the random stuff that he was throwing out there. At one point, he said, Europe was turned into a Christian club, and you had to be Catholic or Protestant. And I thought, well, hang on. Those groups of people didn't really get along with each other. I mean, the Christians, the Christianity and Islam, they just don't play well with others historically, including and perhaps especially other varieties of the same religion, which are particularly gall them sometimes because it's like, no, you're doing my religion the wrong way. That's the thing is, it's a much greater threat that you're going to lose your members of your flock. You're going to have some of your cattle wrestled away from you. If you have two different flavors of Christianity or two different flavors of Islam, they will rightfully feel more threatened by each other. And I mean, for him to say his portrayal of Catholic and Protestant relations in Europe after the Muslims were expelled from Spain and Sicily, I mean, it's incredible that he would think that Islam was really being singled out. What are your guys' thoughts?
You know what I would really like to mention, Leon? I would really like to mention epochs, because if you've got these different units, Now, the thing is, in the Quran it says that the heavens were created in 2 yoms, and the earth was created in 2 yoms. Well, why would it be 2? Surely the amount of time it took to create the heavens was 1 amount of time. It didn't take 2 amounts of time to make the heavens. When you created the earth, it took from the beginning of creating the earth until the end of creating the earth. How can it possibly be divided into 2 and take 2 amounts of time? And if you are going to divide it into, why wasn't it divided by 10 or 40 or something?
So, someone posted this in the chat. I didn't have time to read it because, again, not trying to kick the guy while he's not while he's down. Not trying to take a cheap shot at him now that he's not here. But no sooner did he bring up the Yom thing than he didn't want to talk about it anymore. But someone posted this. It's a hadith from Sahih Muslim, and it's narrated by Abu Huraira, and it's supposed to be the words of the Prophet Muhammad. And it goes like this: Allah, the exalted and glorious, created the clay on Saturday, and he created the mountains on Sunday, and he created the trees on Monday, and he created the things entailing labor on Tuesday, and created light on Wednesday, and Allah caused the animal to spread on Thursday, and created Adam, peace be upon him, after Asr on Friday, the last creation at the last hour of the hours of Friday. In other words, between afternoon and night. Now, this is why they don't want to talk about the hadith. I mean, that is as damning as you can get. It names the specific days of the week. And see, the thing is, thank you to the person who posted that. I was going to go...
Was that Captain Disguise?
I believe it was. He sometimes co-hosts with us. He's very knowledgeable as well. You rummage around in the hadith, and there's always something that just blows all of these equivocations out of the water. And like I've said this on the show in the past, nobody sits down and reads the hadiths like, oh boy, I'm going to read these. You're only even available of their existence when you're debating with a Muslim and he says, oh yeah, well, I don't see why I should listen to you unless unless you've read these hadiths. And you're like, okay, fine. And then after you've read even some of them, you're like, why would Superman tell me where the kryptonite was hidden? Why would someone tell me that these things existed? He must have assumed that I was never going to actually read them, because it's just everything you need to each and every apologist device. There's a hadith, a Sahih hadith, not just any hadith, a Sahih hadith that says, that's wrong, this is what it means, straight from the mouth of the Prophet, although through the chain of narrators you have to give them that, but it's still considered by all these scholars to be authentic, people who were close to the time who you'd think would know better. It's pretty damning evidence.
So what are you suggesting? When we run out of ideas that evening, all we're going to do is just read hadiths?
Well, but we couldn't get him to count as the hadiths, and you can't make him. He's free to say, look, I'm a Quran only, or Like the caller we had who asked him about Bukhari or Muslim, he's at the same place I am. I don't even bother with the other 4 major collections because they usually don't only even give Bukhari or Muslim the time of day, and then they quickly dispense with them. What can you do? It's like a
cherry here and a cherry there.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
But it's better to talk about his arguments, obviously. But if I am going to talk about him personally, I would like to say that he did seem like a nice guy.
Yeah,
I did prefer his version of Islam to Hamza's Horse's version of Islam. I do prefer it's okay if he wants to apostatise, let him, rather than chopping off heads doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
I do prefer this version. The only question I would ask is, now that you've decided it's true, on what basis do you decide it's true, and how will you convert people like Hamza's Horses over to your opinion?
That's impossible. Do you know the latest now? I'm under surveillance again because I've got a privacy complaint by somebody from Hamza for one of my videos.
What was it about?
It's privacy. It's that I am exposing somebody, and according to them, I'm making their private details available, and I'm not. I mean, I'm just using Facebook. So if somebody puts something on Facebook, Facebook very, very clearly says it is not private, it is public. And all I'm doing is I'm just using the public information from Facebook, and the guy files a privacy complaint. I mean, please.
I'm bringing back Jack, who had some more comments. I think this is going to be the last caller we take, so nobody else try to contact us. It might take him a while to get established. Yeah, I mean, there was just so much wrongness on details, large and small. I've got this whole sheet covered. Here's something I've always complained about. When he says, for example, that the Western academic tradition doesn't give credit where credit is due to Arabs and Persians and other other groups that were dominated by Islam, and it's fair to say, okay, they didn't. In short, there is a tendency to ignore Muslim contributions or give them a very mentioned as an afterthought. Like they were a courier between the Greeks and the North Italians, and I do think that is a bit unfair. But I think that it's a very hypocritical accusation when you have the Quran describing the pagans who preceded the Muslims as a people without knowledge and just lambasting them in every possible term, saying, "Oh well, they're just ignorant, they're in the dark, they're without guidance." And these people, the pagans, I mean, they really could make a good case that they were first with the most. I mean, nobody in their right mind is considering converting. I mean, there are some neo-pagans, but you know what I mean. Nobody's seriously going to go back to worshiping Zeus and Aphrodite and that crew. Nobody.
It's not. Their contributions aren't completely ignored, though. I don't know how famous Jim Al-Khalili is throughout the world. He's very well known in the UK as a physicist. He's written a book called The Golden Age of Arabic Science,
which I happen to have right here in my hand. It's a great book.
I believe that originally it was called The Golden Age of Islamic Science or something like that, and lots of people complained and said it's nothing to do with Islam, they were Arabs. And basically the situation isn't Islam taught them how to do science. It's more accurate to say Islam didn't stop them from doing science after they started doing it. I mean, that's the best you can come up with, isn't it, really? It didn't go around telling them to stop.
So Jack, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just on Jimmy Al-Khalili, I mean, his own book, he outlines how Arabic science the science came to be, and it had absolutely nothing to do with Islam. His own book outlines that, so... anyway.
Jack, what do you have for us?
Actually, I was thinking how long this religion will last.
How much religion will last worldwide? I think I think Christianity's dying on the vine, to be honest. Islam, it's a little bit more difficult. It just seems so much more deeply ingrained. He dropped. Okay, he's asked this question, and I'm just going to let him go.
I'll say the thing is that until Muslim societies reach the level of prosperity that we have here in the Occident, so to speak, Islam will not go away. Just as Christianity will not leave Africa until Africa becomes prosperous. I think it has to do with economics and how prosperous and how secure society is. Because when you've got, without security, you have tribalism and scapegoating and you know, all this kind of crap, and religion burns bright. And I don't know if you've noticed, but this is something that people tend to forget, is that Islam exists mostly in the third world. So, yeah. You've got a very funny grin on your face.
I'm typing to Jack. I'm saying he needs to water that stuff down a little bit. Drink some coffee. Anyway, you know what? One of the things that irritates me about both... Now, the reason I chose this topic in the first place is because in the final hour of our conversation with Dr. Syed, Klingschor came in and he wanted to talk about Christianity, and he says that he didn't have a role in the decline of academics in the West, and I just didn't want to talk about it, so I just hung up on him. After taking, giving myself the final word.
To clarify, I said that Christianity was not the root cause of the decline in science. Christianity.
Well, I have it on tape. You said it had nothing to do. You said it had nothing to do with it.
Very little to do with it.
Okay. All right then. Backtracking accepted.
No. Clarification accepted.
Okay. But anyway, but in the case of both Christians who try to give Christianity credit for Renaissance-era achievements, or Muslims who try to give Islam itself the credit for both their own unique original achievements and also the preservation of other traditions, I really think that it's an appalling assertion. I mean, for them to give credit to themselves. I read this book recently. It's called Wuthering Heights, and this guy who wants revenge for things that happened to him as a child, he moves in, there's these two estates, he drives, the people through various machinations, he drives them to poverty, and, he drives them into debt and despair and sickness, and then he ends up through, hook or by crook, appropriating all their estates to himself, and he even raises the child of his most hated nemesis in this very abusive fashion, because this kid, who's the son of his enemy, his father dies due in no small part to this main character's evil, right? And he raises this kid almost as his own, but in a very abusive fashion. And then he does this with several others. He drives these people to ruin, and then he raises their kids under his house and uses them as servants. And I think that that's a little bit like what both Christianity and Islam do with regard to previous traditions, is they'll run in, destroy a civilization, glean a few things from the ruins and say, aha, look what a great job we did preserving this. Well, if you hadn't destroyed the society that originally produced those damn things, then we wouldn't need you to preserve anything. It's ridiculous. Like in the case of the Catholic Church, just recently I saw, I don't know if anyone has seen this, there's a documentary out about a prayer book that underneath it had some work by Archimedes, that it was the last surviving copy of this particular codex, and someone had some monk of the Catholic Church had they had these books in their archives, and they obviously weren't reading them or didn't place a lot of value on them, because a monk just washed off the ink and wrote a prayer book on the top of it, and they carefully and meticulously reconstructed it. And of course the debate rages in the comment sections of any video dealing with this, where they're going back and forth between the religious and anti-religious, and saying, well, this is just a prime example of how the Catholic Church undermined these things. But like what Klingschor said last show we did about the Catholic Church having this knowledge in their possession, that's true. But I think it's unequivocal that they were a negative force because they hoarded this knowledge for themselves, kept the laity in the dark as much as possible, and then they themselves rapidly lost any appreciation for the things that they were hoarding. It was like the fox guarding the hay.
I won't disagree with that.
Okay, I thought you had more. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, when someone today gives Christianity or Islam credit for, I mean, Islam credit for preserving the Greeks or Indians or any of those, or if you get Christianity credit for preserving, not the Greco-Roman tradition and the original Arab and Persian contributions. I think it's a little bit like saying, if I was a pirate back in the day and sailed all the way around the Mediterranean, all around Africa, like a pirate Magellan, raiding all these different civilizations, and then finally coming back and then burying like this massive, deposit of treasure. And some modern person were to come along and say, well, obviously this person was a great philanthropist and numismatist because he preserved all these coins with their dates and stamped of the rulers that otherwise would have been melted down, and now we have them because they're in these treasure chests, and we've learned so much about history. Well, obviously that wasn't my intent. My intent was strengthen myself, weaken everyone else, and I think that, like I said, these religions should not get credit for incidentally preserving the knowledge of societies that they demolished deliberately and calculatedly. Anyone else stop? You haven't said anything in a while. Is he there?
Let's talk about him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stop spamming. Oh, he does my head in. That stupid accent.
I wouldn't point fingers.
I liked your example about the Archimedes thing, though. It's like, one person looks at it and say, look how this has been preserved. Someone else looks at it and say, it's a good job they didn't destroy it properly.
yeah, it's amazing. And anyway, yeah, it was. There were people in the comment section this one bit saying, "Oh yeah, well, just goes to show, aren't you glad we're there?" And I think the Catholic Church, there are still some people who say that it had either a neutral or a positive effect on Western academic standards, and I just think it's appalling. And Klingschor, you had said that it was mostly rhetoric. I think that it's more than enough hard evidence to support that.
Can you find me a proper academic source that argues that the Dark Ages, the shitty aspects of the Dark Ages and the whole collapse of intellectualism was caused by Christianity?
Oh, I'm sure I could if I dug around. But
well, could you please? Because
since this is impromptu, I'll rely on my own judgment.
No, that's fine. Okay. Or at some point, can you find me one so that I can look into because as it stands now, with what I've learned, it just seems like it's rhetoric, and that the church just rode in on the collapse, not itself actually precipitating the collapse. So if you could find me a source that actually outlines your position, I'll happily look at it.
All you have to do is look at the similar decline in the Eastern Empire, what later became known as the Byzantine Empire. You had a similar, they didn't burn all the texts, obviously, but you saw a similar decline, so that by the time you have the Crusades, the Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire had similar comparable levels of academic activity. So there was Christianity in both spheres, but only a collapse of the central government in one. And I before you had said that you would attribute the cause to the collapse of the Western Empire and the relative the political instability and so forth. I think that if you look at the warring states of northern Italy during the early Renaissance, if you look at the political breakup of the Abbasid Caliphates at their height, I think there are a lot of, or you look at the Greek city-states and their constant fighting. I think that...
and Al-Andalus as well. Al-Andalus was also in... But, see, the thing is that what was happening under the Italian city-states was very, very rapid urbanization. The sudden revival of trade and commerce and prosperity. It was an upsurge of prosperity, and this is what the Renaissance rode in on. This great urbanization. And what with the Byzantines, yes... There would have been, I agree. They shut down the schools of philosophy because they were heretical or whatever.
Yeah.
but the society remained extremely prosperous, extremely, it was very high standards of living. It wasn't the Dark Ages. It was just, they shut down philosophy. They shut down. They still used science. They still had amazing architecture and innovations, and they used Greek fire to repel the Arabs. But they shut down the schools of philosophy. So there was some hostility to intellectualism or whatever, or innovation there. But it's not the same picture as it isn't that the church came and destroyed everything and it was all Dark Ages and shit. It wasn't. It was a lot more complicated than that. And I think that it was more that science was declining, and the church just rode in on the back of that. I don't think the church caused it.
See, I would place it largely on two things. First of all, I think the church did have, and I don't consider this conspiratorial, but I think the church was trying to gain a monopoly on the educational institutions and resources by accumulating things to itself. It did preserve tech. I mean, there's a lot of books that the Catholic Church today still has in archives that they won't let anyone look at. I don't mean to sound Da Vinci.
Yeah, that's right. Fucking Vatican. Yeah.
I don't mean to sound Da Vinci Code about it, but it's not. It doesn't seem like something they hide.
Oh, next you'll be telling us about the New World Order, won't you?
Right. Yeah.
Guys, have you two ever heard of a show on a Sunday called The Magic Sandwich Show? It's really good. It's all about Christianity. And I reckon you two guys would really love it.
Well, but this is the larger issue of whether these religions preserve these institutions.
Well, the thing is, look at all religions, right? I won't say all religions. Christianity and Islam, Christianity in America and Islam just about everywhere else is they don't mind people having open minds and investigating as long as what they believe is the conclusion that you reach. In America, there's a lot of Christians that are trying to say that evolution didn't happen, and the same with many Muslims. They're trying to say that evolution didn't happen as well. As long as you're researching something either that doesn't get touched by their religion at all, or you're investigating something which seems to corroborate their religion, then everything's absolutely fine. But as soon as you come across something like evolution that contradicts Islam, a lot of people's understanding of Islam, suddenly it becomes false. And that does have an effect on people. In the UK, not so long ago, you had students walking out of classes in universities in biology whenever they taught evolution. And as P.Z. Meyer said, in doing that, they effectively are ruling themselves out of any kind of academic discoveries in the future. I'm sorry, but nobody can tell me that in this case, Islam is not having a negative effect on science, because it is. And these people are being taught, as long as what it says in this book is not contradicted, you can believe it.
And if you get into a debate with Mo Ansar about that, and he goes back to the 12th century, just say, no, I'm talking about here, 2012, this calendar month in England, the way he was about the... I really like the argument with Aisha, having sex with 9-year-old girls, and then he says, yes, but here in England, you can't. It's like, yes, that's kind of my point. I live in England. All right, I'd like to say it's a secular country, but it's a Christian country. But the laws are mainly secular. Yes, we do have a 16-year-old age of consent. And yes, I'm glad that your religion tells you to do what other people tell you to do when you're living in their country. That's very nice. But if I happen to be living in a country like Afghanistan, then that's a slightly different issue. And for all those 9-year-old girls out there in Afghanistan that are having sexual intercourse and aren't really very happy about it, I think it's a big shame that Allah didn't make it just a little bit more clear as to how old Aisha was at the time. Yeah. Well, anyway, don't plug the Magic Sandwich Show on this. They don't plug us, so fuck them. Anyway... The thing is, you were saying about maybe we're drifting more towards Christianity. I think we didn't have a Christian guest today. We only had Muslim. And I think this is a show about religion with a focus on Islam. And the thing I want to address is the Catholic Church and the role that I feel, and I'm perfectly comfortable saying it's my characterization, in the decline of academics and the near extermination, or at least occlusion of the pre-existing text. I think that the whole history of the church really can be summed up in this little play where you say, okay, you get the priest up there who represents every Catholic priest ever, and he says, okay, folks, here's the deal. All worldly things are vain and futile and transient. So be prepared to turn them all over to us as it happens. Nothing in this world matters. The only thing that matters is this book. Can we read it? No. That's it. That's the history of the Catholic Church. You know, they take the dial from a study of a wide variety of subjects and focus on theology to the exclusion of them, even when there's not a direct conflict. Obviously, you have Christianity, conservative Christians battling against certain things about biology and cosmology and taking issue with things that they seem to contradict, or giving ground and compromising and saying the scriptures are a metaphor and a day is really an age and it's really 6 ages and so forth. But for the most part, even if there isn't a direct conflict, there still is an aversion to curiosity about the natural world or other political, obviously religious or theological, or anything that might provoke inquiry into a dangerous area. I think there's a pretty solid record of the Abrahamic religions discouraging that kind of inquiry, or at least causing a distraction away from it.
But who is more embarrassed about their scripture, Christians or Muslims?
I would say Christians, by far. Christians aren't very knowledgeable about their scripture, but they're proud. They're not as proud of it. Look at William Lane Craig. Gleefully describe some of the atrocities in the Old Testament. Muslims, they're proud of whatever's in there. Whatever's in their holy book.
Well, we saw today that he's not. As soon as we talk about Aisha, suddenly, no, she was not 6. No, she was not 9. She might have been 18.
That's in the hadiths, though. That's in the hadiths.
Yeah, but it's part of Islam, isn't it?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. According to our last 2 guests, apparently not. But of course, we all know that it played a formative part. But as far as who's more proud, I would say Muslims, if they detect any objectionable material in their scriptures, they're much slower. The hadiths, of course, they seem completely disposable these days. So they'll distance the hadiths. But with the Quran itself, no compromise or nothing that's acknowledged as a criticism. There are cases like the day being an age where they'll compromise a bit, but as far as actual embarrassment, as far as kind of like sheepishly looking at the floor, much less of that in the Quran. Although I think here's something that two of our callers in a row, as a matter of fact, said. They said that Islam to them had fewer logical problems and contradictions, but they thought that Christianity was less, socially or morally objectionable. And I think that they're talking about the mean average practice of Christianity in the developed world. Certainly, if you include, if you look at, dig around in the Bible, you'll find stuff that I think makes the Quran look very tame.
Well, if the Bible, I don't know much about the Bible, but if the Bible was written by different people, I would expect more conflicts in there. Whereas the advantage Muhammad had was single author. He had 23 years to make it up. Just wait. Right? He had 23 years to make it up. And he had all the counter-arguments presented to him by Jews during his lifetime. So it's like, you've just called Mary the sister of Aaron. Well, that's not right. It was a different Miriam. They go, oh, yeah, that's because we all named their entire family after an entire family from earlier in history. He came up with all the counter-arguments based on arguments that he had with Jews at the time. So he had the advantage of knowing what the counter-arguments were and coming up with excuses at the time, and then eventually you end up with his book, when people scrutinise it, they go, you know what, it seems so consistent that there is no errors in it. Go on then, stop spamming. You can tell me how many people made the Quran there.
No, actually, I was going to say, look, the Jewish God has a son, so there's a lot of errors that continue, and there's a lot of people who contributed to the Quran the same way as there's a lot of people who wrote the Bible. So there's no difference there. And I think the errors are as consistent in the Bibles as they are in the Quran. There's no difference. And look at the hadiths. I mean, it's even worse there.
Well, I think we covered a lot of ground in a measly 3 hours.
What did we actually learn today? What is it that we have learned between looking at Christianity and looking at Islam? Is there a huge difference? Is there any consistency, or is it the same God? Is it a different one? I still don't know more.
I think we know what we knew from the beginning. Christians think it's not the same God, and Muslims think it is.
Yeah.
It is.
So
I think it's more for the benefit of the listener.
Yeah. Rash, you said you didn't know much about the Bible. I've read it. It's crap.
No, I've read some of it. You know.
Yeah. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Summary ever.
I
read the Old Testament and I was disgusted, and I put it down, and I thought, whoever this God is, if it exists, it's an asshole. And then some point in the future, my wife was she wasn't giving birth, she was waiting to give birth. We've been sitting around for ages, and as usual there was a Gideon's Bible sitting around, so I picked it up and I read whoever wrote the first gospel. I sat and read that, and I just thought, this is a load of cack. And that was enough for me.
What an interesting dynamic. You, a Christian, and a Muslim in the same room is like, well, yeah, you know, Mr. Christian, if a God wrote this, that God's an asshole. And the Muslim says, hey, that's our God you're talking about. Christian says, no, it isn't. Get the fuck out. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, for showing up. Thanks to, in absentia, thank you to Mo Ansar, should you watch this. I hope you don't, if he does watch it, I don't know if he will, I hope you don't feel that we were too unfair, but of course you had to go. Please, you're welcome to address anything. I hope that nobody feels like they had a knife and put their back, and I hope that while he was here, he didn't feel bullied. I think we gave him enough time to speak. But thank you, Mo Ansar, for appearing. Thank you to Stopspamming and Klingschor, and a very special thanks to Rationalizer, who was backed by overwhelming popular demand, and we're of course very glad.
Popular demand of Atheismo alone.
No, you should have seen. You weren't watching the chat. People were happy to have you back. Now we just need to get Hassan back. I don't know what we can.
Money. We'll pay him off.
Okay. Take care, everyone. We'll see you in another 2 weeks with another topic. I don't know what. We'll pick one.
Check us out on Facebook.
We'll pick one out of a hat. Thank you very much.
Yes, bye, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum.